Chapter 1. Day 1. James Richards' heart pounded like it wanted out of his chest, and his lungs burned with a white-hot heat. He ignored the pain and continued to sprint. This wasn't the Marine Corps marathon or one of those themed fitness vacations, but James ran for his life. Adrenaline fed by pure fear drove him forward, even without a clear destination in mind. All around James, the zombie apocalypse had begun, and his fun Washington, D.C. getaway had ended. Most likely his upcoming marriage was now over too, since his vegetarian fiancée decided ripping into the flesh of a complete stranger had become her thing. He had no choice but to leave Melody behind to complete her feeding frenzy on human flesh. As James rounded the corner by the Grade Ape house, he noticed a woman who stood over a group of zombies feasting on their own midday snack. Their meal had been a living person minutes ago, before becoming their afternoon treat. Out of instinct, he grabbed her arm and dragged her along behind him. She stumbled but righted herself before she finally broke into a run alongside James. With all the shouts and moans and groans, from both the living and the newly raised dead, James didn't have time to notice if she had been old, young, fit, fat, or attractive. There might be time for niceties later, when monsters weren't trying to devour them. Now there's only time to race on towards safety. A large puddle of blood pooled across the path just past the small mammal house. They both hit the liquid at top speed and slid down the sidewalk. While James skated across the blood, the woman's hand slipped from his and wrenched free. He pinwheeled his arms like a Saturday morning cartoon character who tried to regain their footing on a slippery surface. His feet careened through the puddle to the dry ground beyond, and he regained his equilibrium there. He turned and scanned the bloody scene behind him. James discovered the woman he tried so hard to save hadn't been as lucky as him. The path of her skid led her straight to the ground, where she landed face first in an enormous pile of human remains. She stood, but continued to slip and slide like the fallen cartoon character. Why do cartoons keep coming to mind during this nightmare, who can't quite get their feet under them? Before James reacted or the woman could right herself, a large man in a dirty uniform pounced on top of her and ripped the soft flesh of her throat out with his bare teeth. James stared in shock for a second before the fear kicked in and pushed him back into a full sprint, away from the bloody death scene. He couldn't do anything to save the woman now, and he had only known her for a few brief minutes, so there's no reason to die alongside her. Before he pushed away from this last gruesome nightmare, James noticed the uniform worn by the attacker had belonged to the Metropolitan Police Department, and the police officer's holster was empty. Off to his right, an exit road and parking lot came into view, but being a tourist, James didn't know where the street led to. It's better to stick to the route he entered the zoo from, and knew where to find the train station. James and his fiancée Melody had walked in from the Connecticut Avenue entrance to the zoo, after they rode the metro from their hotel. He didn't know where to run to or what he would find once he got there. James only knew if he stopped running now, he would die a painful death. Teeth tearing into your flesh wouldn't be a painless way to die. Somewhere between the American bison and the panda overlook, he found it. A glint of metal laid on the ground. James only noticed it because he heard the little girl's voice scream, "Mommy," while she continued to cry hysterically. This would be his second attempt to become a hero today, and James went into action while he hoped for a better outcome this time. He swooped in like a superhero and grabbed both the girl and the police officer's dropped gun, and continued his run toward the exit at Connecticut Avenue. This little girl had stood crying over the remains of her mom, at least it wasn't spilt milk, while 3 zombies greedily chowed down on her corpse. Maybe the girl had been too small for them to perceive as a threat, or maybe she hadn't been a big enough snack for their ravenous hunger, but they ignored her as she stood nearby and cried. The exit onto Connecticut Avenue stood right before them, and James could finally see their freedom from this nightmare. His legs felt like 2 limp noodles and his back hurt from carrying the screaming toddler, but he continued to race onward. James had no idea what state the world outside of the zoo would be in, but knew it had to be better than the nightmare he ran from. Only death scenes from your worst nightmares laid behind him in the zoo of death. Now the exit sign stood right in front of James's face. He could almost reach out and touch it. His spirits lifted a little with the sight, since he felt the unknown had to be better than the hell he had experienced inside the park. Both his back and legs were refreshed, and his lungs didn't feel like someone had filled them with burning coals. Many times, this type of euphoria distracted you and made you reckless. One might not call it negligent, but you let your guard down, only a little, thinking you're finally safe from the danger caching you. This elation caused James to miss the small frost heave from last winter, which raised part of the sidewalk right in front of his path of travel. If you had been moving at normal walking speeds, the worst reaction might be a stubbed toe and a spoken curse word. But even then, only if you were unlucky or not observant. When running for your life with a screaming and squirming toddler on your back, the damage caused by this minor defect proved more severe. That small lip caught James's right foot, and his forward momentum pushed him over face first onto the solid, unforgiving concrete sidewalk. Like those Saturday cartoons James used to love as a child, his fall felt like it took forever. He felt his foot catch on the lip, and the pain shot up his leg as his ankle bent in a direction it shouldn't. His body transitioned from upright to a horizontal position, which felt a little like flying. Just like Superman, except the flight isn't as long or the landing as painless as the cartoons used to show. James felt the little girl fly from her perch high on his back. He hoped she would be okay, and the ground where she landed would be soft. Alas, we rarely get what we want, and James didn't get it that day either. The hard, unforgiving concrete sidewalk slapped him upside his head like a right uppercut from Mike Tyson. Those were his final thoughts as the world went black on day 1 of the apocalypse. Chapter 2. 2 weeks earlier. Big Jim Richards surprised his fiancée Melody with a trip to the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. They both worked non-stop on the family's corn farm in Iowa for months, and they both needed a break. The wedding would take place after the harvest, but working under the smoldering summer sun took a toll on him as he got older. He booked business-class tickets. Big Jim was 6'5" tall and 250 pounds of solid muscle, so coach would be too tight, and a hotel in Alexandria, Virginia near the metro station. It put them close to the city, but away from the crowds. No rental car because DC had excellent public transportation, at least that's what the trip counselor website said. Jim even scored tickets to a Nationals baseball game while they were in town. The tickets ended up being easy to score because the team sucked and the fans were staying away this year. There wouldn't be any postseason baseball in DC this October. Their flight departed on a beautiful sunny day, and they arrived at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport on time and without incident. The crowds were lighter than he had expected, which Jim took as a good omen for their trip. Fewer people meant they could see more during their 2-week visit. Murmurs abound about strange happenings in the city, but Big Jim was a realist and not into the conspiracy theories littering internet forums. One wacko in Boston, Nolan Ryan, predicted the rise of the undead. Jim read Nolan's blog post to Melody, and they both laughed. Where do all these crazy people come from? After depositing their luggage at the hotel, they took the metro into the city. Big Jim and Melody spent the day wandering around the National Mall visiting the sights, before grabbing a dinner at the Hard Rock Cafe. The sun shined down, and when combined with the humidity, it felt like the inside of a furnace outside. This heat must have contributed to the lighter crowds who visited the city. Without reservations, they walked into the restaurant without a wait. They felt lucky since they picked the right time to visit. The next morning, Big Jim and Melody slept in. That night, the Red Sox and Nationals would face off in their last game of the week, and they had tickets to the game. Neither cheered for either team, but visiting a baseball park wasn't something farmers from Iowa usually had time for. Crops needed tending to during the summer and harvesting during the fall when baseball season played out. Besides, what's more American than baseball? Melody and Big Jim watched the Red Sox destroy the Nationals on the field. With no horse in the race, they enjoyed the game for what it was. There's nothing like ballpark food, and they feasted during the game. A Chesapeake crab cake sandwich and a 3-piece suit helped to satisfy Big Jim's appetite during the game. After filing out of the stadium, they had a hike to the metro station where they'd catch the train that would return them to their hotel. During the long walk through the city, a bee stung Melody. Both of them worked outside and had been stung many times before, so beyond the initial discomfort, the event faded from their memory. The next day, they visited the National Gallery of Art, the National Archives, and then took a stroll around Chinatown. Compared to Jim, Melody was petite, standing 5 feet 6 inches tall and weighing 120 pounds. She prided herself on her level of fitness and her healthy vegetarian diet. So Jim wondered why Melody struggled to keep up with him while they walked around the city. Melody normally led the way, while Big Jim took advantage of his long strides to keep pace with her. True, the sun and humidity made it feel like 106 degrees, but she labored like a fat guy at an all-you-could-eat buffet. Are you feeling okay? Just a little hot. Can we stop and rest? Sure, honey. Let's stop in this coffee shop and get something cold to drink. I could use some ice water myself. Okay, thanks. Even though it was the middle of the afternoon, this location of Moonstag Coffee had no other customers. 2 bored-looking baristas stood behind the counter. Big Jim led Melody to a seat while he went to the counter to order 2 bottled waters. The clerk looked disappointed when Jim didn't order an overpriced coffee drink. Who spent that much money on coffee? Here's your water, sweetheart. Thank you. He handed her the bottle, and she struggled with loosening the top. What was happening to Melody? Here, let me get that for you. Big Jim twisted the cap from the bottle, and she smiled up at him. With shaking hands, she lifted the bottle to her lips and took a sip. The heat had made him parched, so he downed the bottle of water in one big swig. They sat in the icy air conditioning for half an hour, and she only drank about half the bottle. Would you like to go back to the hotel so you can rest? You wouldn't mind? Jim noticed she had finally caught her breath as she spoke this time. Of course not. You probably picked up one of those 24-hour bugs on the plane. We're supposed to go to the National Zoo on Friday, and I know you don't want to miss that. Do you want me to get you something else before we leave the coffee house? No, I'm okay. Thank you. A brief rest will do me good. He helped Melody to her feet and led her from the store. The closest metro station location was 2 blocks south of Moonstag. They ambled to the station together and boarded the next train bound for their hotel. Only 2 other passengers rode in their car. It had been years since Big Jim visited D.C., but he never saw the crowds this thin. His concern remained focused on Melody, so he didn't give it much thought while they rode. Once they got to the room, Melody wanted to crawl into bed and sleep. She urged Jim to go out and get himself some dinner, and he reluctantly caved in to her demand. He offered to bring something back for her, but she declined his offer of takeout. A pizza joint within walking distance had excellent food, according to the lady at the hotel's front desk. Big Jim enjoyed a large meat lover's pizza, along with a pitcher of beer for dinner. Melody didn't mind Jim eating meat, but he always felt like a jerk eating something like this in front of her. The food tasted wonderful, and he wondered why only one other table had customers sitting at it. The next morning, Melody reported feeling better and accompanied Jim to the hotel's free breakfast. Jim noticed she didn't eat as much as normal, but she still consumed a healthy amount of food. I'm glad to see you're feeling better today. Told ya, it was a 24-hour bug. Okay, doctor. I'm feeling better, but still not 100%. Mind if I stay in the room today? The National Zoo will require a lot of walking, and I don't want to miss it. I could stay here with you today too if you want. No, Jim. You really wanted to see the Air and Space Museum, so you should go. I'll be fine, and it'll give me a chance to rest in the AC rather than the pits of hell. Melody laughed at her own joke. Jim didn't want to leave Melody, but she insisted. He took the train into the city and spent the day touring the museum. The day had been fun, but he worried about Melody's health the entire time he had visited the museum. When he returned to the hotel room, he found all his worries pointless. Melody sat on the room's sofa, showered, dressed, and ready to go out for dinner. Wasting no time, he jumped into the shower himself and washed off the day's sweat. They took a taxi into Old Town and ate at a romantic restaurant. I'm glad to see you're feeling better tonight. Yes, I feel like a new woman. A little rest did the trick. How was the Air and Space Museum? I loved it, but I'll admit, I worried about you the entire time. That's why I love you, Jim. You're so sweet. The server brought their food, and they both ate with gusto. Big Jim rejoiced seeing Melody back to her normal self. She lived a healthy lifestyle, and seeing her ill wasn't typical. After dinner, they returned to the hotel, and they made love before they passed out under the sheets. This trip had been a dream come true for Big Jim. When they awoke Friday morning, Big Jim practically leapt from bed with happiness. Melody had recovered from her mysterious bug, and they were having a great time away from the farm. He left her laying in bed while he jumped into the shower to start their day. Today, they'd planned a visit to the National Zoo. The red pandas were a favorite of Melody's, and Jim looked forward to seeing her face light up once they laid eyes on them. After drying off, Jim found Melody still lounging in bed. Wake up, sleepyhead. I feel sluggish this morning. My head hurts. You didn't have anything to drink last night, so what's up with that? Maybe too much excitement after 2 days of being sick. I'll jump in the shower and that should do the trick of waking me up. Jim didn't see her moving much quicker after the shower. At breakfast, Melody had 4 cups of coffee, and that's more than she normally consumed during the entire day. He tried to engage her in conversation, but the effort proved futile. Melody insisted on going to the zoo, so Big Jim gave in and took her. They strolled to Metro Station and boarded the train without conversation. Melody moved in a lethargic fashion. She acknowledged Jim's words with a nod or shake of her head, but didn't speak a word. Even when they stood in front of the pandas, her favorites, Melody seemed unenthusiastic. Are you feeling okay? You love the pandas. She turned at his voice but didn't respond to his question. Beads of sweat rolled down Melody's face and her eyes appeared glassy. Without speaking, she turned from the pandas and walked toward the cheetah conservation area. Big Jim watched as she plowed into some guy who staggered past them on the path which led to the cheetahs. Neither seemed to acknowledge each other as they collided and continued on. Sorry, sir. Jim called out, but the guy didn't look back at them or acknowledge his words. Strange behavior. Big Jim finally caught up to Melody in front of the cat's house. After drifting through the morning, she now raced towards some unseen target. He couldn't figure out what was going on with her. Melody, you practically knocked that guy over. There's people climbing into the cheetah area. 6 people climbed over the fence and charged at the cheetah's mouth first. They snapped and ran straight toward the big cats. The cheetahs responded with sharp teeth and claws that ripped into the flesh of the attackers. These crazy people didn't slow their approach and continued their onslaught on the animals. Big Jim couldn't believe what he saw happening before him. Melody, are you seeing this? As he turned back to the last place she had been standing, Melody stood doubled over puking on the ground. Her puke looked more like blood than anything she had eaten during their morning meal. Before he had time to register what was happening and move to help her, Melody leapt onto an older gentleman and ripped his throat out with her teeth. What the hell? The older lady who had stood with the man moments before let out a long scream. A teenage girl tackled her from behind and ripped her throat out to reward her efforts. Big Jim froze as he surveyed the horror unfolding before him. From his peripheral vision, a large man lumbered toward him with his mouth snapping in the breeze. With a fist the size of a canned ham, Jim struck the man square in his face. An unnatural crack resulted, which flattened the approaching Hulk. Not knowing what to do, Big Jim turned and ran away. Chapter 3. Day 2. James Richards' head throbbed and his muscles ached. He laid on a hard surface and tried to clear the fog from his brain. Did he drink too much last night? Jim didn't drink beyond his body's capacity to handle the alcohol because he knew the problems associated with being intoxicated. Why couldn't he cut through the cloud of confusion? While he tried to decipher the puzzle, a voice spoke. The big guy is coming around. Thank goodness. We can use another set of hands. I thought his injuries might be too severe. Another voice responded to the first. An injury? That would explain the headache and the sore muscles. What type of injury? Big Jim hadn't taken part in any missions for years now. It must be because of something else. An accident, maybe? The fog cleared and everything rushed back into Jim's mind. Melody, a strict vegetarian, ripped the throat out of a stranger with her teeth. Mass hysteria, as others joined in on her newfound hobby of cannibalism. All the running. Jim trying to save a woman and then a child. Wait, the child? In Jim's mind, he exploded to his feet. To an outside observer, he looked like a large grizzly bear trying to get his feet under him as the tranquilizer dart wore off. The results were blinding dizziness, buckling knees, and the urge to hurl. Jim's butt crashed back down onto the hard bed he had been resting on. Easy, big guy. You hit your head pretty hard. You're safe now. Take it easy. A woman with curly gray hair and a kind face spoke to him. Her gray eyes complemented her hair color, and Jim wondered if the color was natural. He struggled to focus on his present situation. My name is Mary, and I was an emergency room nurse at George Washington University Hospital. You may have a concussion, and you need to lay back down and get some rest. A fine mist still obscured the edges of Jim's brain, so he took a moment to process what the woman said to him. The room didn't look like a hospital ward, but a cheap office space in a large warehouse building. He sat on the edge of a makeshift bed, made with a thin mattress on top of a pile of wooden pallets. Mary wore dirty scrubs, and Jim noticed the bags under her compassionate eyes. I'm Jim Richards. Where are we? What happened to the girl? Hello, Jim. We're safe in an abandoned warehouse on the Virginia side of the Potomac. Those monsters won't be able to reach us here. They brought you in alone. Sorry, there wasn't any girl with you. Deep down he knew the fall had been the child's doom, but one can always hope for a different outcome. Big Jim never spent a lot of time in D.C., but he tried to recall the map of the area. He knew the protocols that the government would execute, and Jim needed to figure out if they really were safe. How far are we from D.C.? Oh, Jim. No need to worry. We're safe here from those monsters. Plus, they have a small armed group inside the warehouse. Nothing to worry about. Just rest. No, you don't understand the containment protocols. They will attempt to contain the threat, and that's bad depending on where we are. We need to move. Big Jim rose from the bed and felt the ground sway like a boat on rough seas. He needed to get it together and get out of here. Jim staggered toward the door as Mary raced after him. You need to lay down. You're in no condition to go anywhere. He ignored Mary's words and continued to walk into the large open space of the warehouse. Random boxes and garbage were scattered throughout the area, along with several years' worth of dirt and dust covering everything. Easy, big man. I think you should go back in there and lay down. You look like shit. It was the first voice he heard speaking to Mary. This guy was a shifty-looking character who proclaimed his gang status openly with the clothes he wore from before the world's collapse. Look, y'all are welcome to stay here, but you're going to die if you do. Two more men joined the first. All were smaller than Jim and had pistols stuck in their ill-fitting pants. Even in this weakened state, these three men posed no threat to Jim. The man who spoke drew a ratty-looking 9mm pistol and pointed it at Jim. Like a gangster on TV, he held the gun sideways. I'm the one with the gun, so you need to listen to me, big man. Get your ass back in that room. With one practiced quick smooth move, Big Jim twisted the man's wrist and took the gun away from him. No one reacted in the second the act took for Jim to execute and relieve the man of his weapon. He pointed it at the three men and spoke in a clear, calm manner. Don't think about reaching for those pistols because I'll kill the three of you without blinking my eyes. Using 2 fingers of your left hand, place your weapons on the ground and kick them over here. The two thugs glared at him, but both complied with his command. Both guns settled to a stop about 10 feet from the closest man. His attention never faltered, since he had been in worse situations like this before, and he knew the potential dangers. "You're dead, big guy. You're so funny, little man." Jim knew his words would escalate the situation, but he needed to move things along. No need to placate the thugs and play their games. "You should always be nice to people. I'm going to leave you behind to die now. Don't blame me, you had a chance. Mary, you can stay here with them or go with me." "I'm with you, Jim. These punks kidnapped me from the hospital 2 days ago and brought me here to nurse their wounds." "Okay, that's settled. Sorry, guys." Big Jim swung his left hand around, cold clocking the closest gang member on the side of his head. His head snapped back, and he dropped to the floor like a sack of potatoes. Thug number 2 attempted to bum rush Jim, but his second strike landed on his temple and rendered him unconscious. The last scumbag ran for the exit rather than stand and fight with Jim. "Please stop. I don't want to do this." Gangbanger 3 continued to run until Jim drilled him 3 times with 9mm rounds from the pistol he held. 1 to the head and 2 to center mass, just like they had trained him. The entire confrontation took less than 15 seconds. Mary stood looking at the victims with her mouth hanging open. "Mary, do they have a vehicle we can take?" His words caused her to jump and turn toward him. "Yes, but I don't know where they keep the keys." A quick check of the pockets of thug number 1 produced a set of keys with a Cadillac emblem on them. Jim held them up for Mary to see, and she led them to the door thug number 3 had run toward. Outside the door, Jim found an Escalade with large custom rims and a jet black paint job. It was the type of ride any self-respecting gang member would approve of. The engine roared to life, and Jim awoke the in-dash GPS to find the quickest route away from Washington, D.C. They needed distance and needed it quickly. Once he found their location on the map, he put the caddy in gear and floored the accelerator. The big truck responded with squealing tires, and they tore off down the road. "What's the plan, Jim?" "Survival. We need to put distance between us and the city as fast as we can." "Why? What difference does it make?" "The government has had containment protocols in place for years. There's always been a threat of chemical weapons being used against a major U.S. city. An outbreak because of this type of terrorist attack needs to be stopped and contained so it doesn't kill everyone in the country." "You think this was a chemical weapon attack?" "Who knows, but I'd guess not. We'd all be affected if it was. The principle is the same, though. Protect key citizens and then cleanse the land of the plague." "Okay. So how do you cleanse the plague?" "With fire." "What produces the biggest, hottest fire?" "A nuke." "Wait a minute. You think they're going to nuke Washington, D.C.? "Not think, I know they're going to. If they don't, then no one from the government survived, and we're all doomed." Mary shook her head and turned away from Jim to stare out the passenger side window. He wondered what she thought about the rise of flesh-eating monsters, being kidnapped by gang members, and now escaping with someone who sounded like a conspiracy nut. Problem was, Jim had done his time serving the government, and he only told the truth as he knew it. Instead of worrying about her reactions, Jim kept driving away at speeds not safe for normal travel. Traffic wasn't an obstacle, but the roads were littered with abandoned cars. They had made it to the edge of what should be the damage radius, and Jim thought they might make it to safety. A blinding flash lit up the sky from behind. "Get your head down," he yelled, knowing what would come next. The pressure wave caught them a few seconds afterward. It caused the rear windows of the Cadillac to explode inward. Big Jim lost control of the SUV, and they crashed into the ditch on the side of the road. As the airbags exploded, Jim's ears rang and his head throbbed with pain anew. Consciousness stayed with Jim this time, but part of him wished for a brief break from all the pain. Dust from the deployed airbags settled, and Jim knew OnStar wouldn't be sending any assistance this time. Any help would be of the self-service variety. After taking a quick inventory of all his aches and pains, he discovered no serious injuries, just throbbing pain coming from all over his body. "Mary, are you okay?" No response to his question, but she may not be able to hear him yet. Airbags sound like shotguns firing and are deafening inside the confined space of a vehicle. He turned his head toward the passenger side and discovered the real reason Mary didn't respond. When the pressure wave drove the Escalade off the road, it crashed through a chain-link fence before coming to rest in the bottom of the ditch. A post from the fence broke loose and impaled Mary's head through the truck's seat. Another companion who traveled with Jim, and another death. Everyone dies, Jim thought. Big Jim pushed the driver's door open and climbed out of the wrecked vehicle. They came to rest about 30 feet down in the gully, so he climbed up the hill to the road. He confirmed his hypothesis of being in the light damage area from the blast. Buildings still stood, but the windows on the side facing DC had shattered and blown in. This action of attempting to purge the threat told Jim that someone in the government survived, and if Jim wanted to continue living, he needed to head west while avoiding any major cities. After an hour of walking, Jim came across a bike shop. He liberated an e-bike to continue his trip. Luck blessed Big Jim because he found a bike in his size with a full charge on the battery. The battery lasted for 3.5 hours and moved him another 60 miles. Jim thought his direction of travel had been west, but without a compass or GPS, he actually traveled in a southwestern direction. With a dead battery on his bike and sunset coming, Jim looked for a place to spend the night. A deserted suburban home provided the needed oasis for the evening. The power was still on in the home when he arrived, so Jim plugged in the bike for a fresh charge. He found a Ford F-150 pickup truck in the garage with 3/4 of a tank of gas and a filled jerry can with gas for the riding mower. He'd throw the bike in the bed when he left to provide backup transportation, but take the truck to move faster. The pantry was well stacked while the refrigerator held little food beyond some condiments. It made Jim think the owners were out on vacation when things went bad. Part of him felt guilty about stealing their food and truck, but who knew if they would ever return to their home? They were just as likely part of the undead horde now. With the rise of the zombies and the fall of nuclear missiles on U.S. soil, the world had become a different place. Survival of the fittest ruled the land, and Big Jim intended on surviving. Chapter 4. 3 years earlier. Big Jim Richards laid naked next to Lily Nelson while sleep eluded him. He should be able to relax, but the doubts about his unknown future swirled through his mind. They both survived the mission, and this had been his last hurrah. Retirement would be his reward for the 15 years he served in this dangerous profession, and now he faced the unfamiliar. He had carefully orchestrated each moment of his life until this day. Lily stormed into Jim's life as the CIA liaison for his final 3 missions. She was fit, funny, and beautiful. Her laser focus got Jim and his team through their missions with no difficulties or any lost lives. All objectives were met, and now Big Jim was free to live his life as he wanted. Why couldn't he shut down his brain and rest? The release granted from satisfying sex helped him to relax most nights, but not tonight. The clock read 2:37, and sleep still stood out of reach, so Jim eased out of the bed. He tried to not disturb Lily, but she stirred as he rose. "What time is it?" she asked, finishing her question with a long and audible yawn. "Depends on your perspective. It's either really early or very late. Go back to sleep." "Why aren't you sleeping? Is everything okay?" "I'm fine. Just can't shut my brain down tonight so I can sleep. Go back to bed. One of us should get some rest." "Didn't I tire you out enough earlier?" Jim chuckled. "Yes, dear. You're the best. Just too much on my mind." Her breathing changed, letting Jim know she had fallen back asleep. He slipped into his clothes and stepped out onto the balcony of their hotel room. With Uncle Sam paying the bill, they stayed in a 5-star oceanfront hotel. The room was on the 32nd floor, but he could hear the waves breaking on the shore because of the silence of the early morning. Who else was awake? Big Jim sat and listened to the waves and soaked in the fresh, salty air. All the while, he let his mind drift back over the last 15 years of his life. On his 18th birthday, Big Jim tried to enlist in the military. His plan had been to become a member of the Special Forces. Problem was, people his size don't fill those roles. The Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines all passed on his request. Both the Navy and Coast Guard recruiters said his size wouldn't work in either of their branches in any role. Their rejection discouraged him, and Big Jim almost gave up on the idea of serving his country. Then a man in a black suit approached him to tell Jim about the classified group called the Problem Solvers. If Big Jim committed to a 15-year term in the Problem Solvers, he'd get the most elite training, serve his country on special missions, and retire with a full pension. Anyone on the outside would see his service as a Marine, and he would retire as a colonel with a full military pension. It seemed too good to be true, but Big Jim had no other prospects, so he accepted the offer. The training had been grueling. 24 months of physical, mental, and weapons training, which made Navy SEAL training look like a pleasant stroll through the park on a Sunday afternoon. It transformed James Richards from a capable barroom brawler to an elite killing machine. Big Jim proved his talent as the most dangerous man in the world with each completed mission. Along the way, Jim learned why the 15-year term had been dangled in front of each prospect's face. Military recruits looked forward to 20 years of service before they received their retirement. Those who served in the Problem Solvers rarely made it to the 15-year mark. Many outstanding soldiers lost their lives or were permanently disabled during Jim's time serving. They called the Problem Solvers in to complete missions when and where official forces couldn't act. For instance, the Posse Comitatus Act didn't let the military operate in the United States, but enemies of the state can live and function within the country's borders. One call to the Problem Solvers and these enemies disappeared for good. Because of Big Jim's long and successful career, he reached the level of team leader. This gave him insight into the workings of the Problem Solvers itself, and a behind-the-scenes glimpse at the United States government's operations. Jim knew the government's response to terrorist attacks, virus outbreaks, natural disasters, enemy attack, and even defending against zombies. They had made jokes for years about CONUP 8888, but Jim knew the reality behind their plan. The first light of dawn illuminated the morning sky with brilliant red, orange, and yellow colors. It would be a beautiful day with a clear blue sky. Big Jim's first day of the rest of his life. He felt more unsure about his future than he had on his 18th birthday. How do you reinvent yourself at 33 with no life skills except violence? There was always the family's corn farm in Iowa, but he had been away forever. Lily walked through the slider, wearing the fluffy white hotel robe, pulling Jim from his thoughts of the past. "Good morning." "You're up early, Jim." "Good morning. I hope I didn't wake you. Too much on my mind and I couldn't sleep." "Well, it's a big day for you. You made it through your last mission. Congratulations on your retirement." "Thanks. That's what's been troubling me. I'm happy to be done but not sure of what comes next." "Just enjoy life. What did you do before?" "I joined the Problem Solvers when I was 18. So before that, I worked on my family's corn farm in Iowa." Lily laughed. "I can't imagine you as a farmer." "Lily, why don't you come with me?" "What?" "Leave the CIA and start a life with me." "As a farmer?" "Sorry, that wouldn't work for me." "We don't have to go to Iowa. We could go anywhere. With you at my side, I can face anything." She smiled at Jim, but the smile quickly faded. "You don't understand. Things are easier for you as a man. I was the first successful Navy SEAL and female recruit to JSOC. I can't throw all that away for anyone. Even you, Jim. I do love you, but I just can't do it. Please stay out here while I gather my things and go. I can't stand to see the hurt in your eyes." With tears running down her cheeks, Lily turned away from Jim and walked back into the hotel room. He heard Lily banging around inside the room, and then the room door slammed shut. The sea breeze dried the tears which rolled down his face. Only the unknown laid ahead of Jim, and he would face it all alone. Big Jim stayed at the hotel for another week. On day number 5, a package arrived for him. It released him from service with a thank you and gave him the paperwork for his retirement. A reminder about the top-secret nature of his work with the problem solvers and a warning to not discuss it with anyone. To the world, James Richards had served in the Marines and retired a colonel. If anyone ever questions his service, the message was to obfuscate and lie. In addition, they provided a one-time payment of $10 million tax-free to an offshore account for his service. Jim laughed to himself, realizing the problem solvers used both the carrot and the stick on their retirees. He was happy to leave the life behind and never wanted to see any of them again. The last day of his stay in this paradise came too fast. Now he had to face the future, but no fresh revelations came to him. With no other options, Jim headed to Iowa to visit his brother, Judd Richards. Judd had taken up the family business and farmed corn on 350 acres of fertile Iowa farmland. They had always been close growing up, even with the 4 years that separated them. Jim had wished he had been a better big brother these last 15 years, but maybe he could make up for it now. A top-of-the-line Learjet sat waiting to fly Jim to Iowa. It would be his last benefit from the problem solvers. At the other end, the local Ford dealer had a brand new F-150 waiting for him. Might as well spend the money he earned for some good. The GPS directed him to Judd's place. It was close to the farm he grew up on, but Judd had been smart and grew the business well beyond their father's old farm. Jim drove down the long driveway to the large farmhouse. No one would ever call Judd tiny, but he was a smaller man than Jim. He stood at only 6 feet tall and weighed around 200 pounds. His skin had become well tanned by the summer sun and his hair bleached blonde. The same easygoing smile Jim remembered growing up lit up Judd's face. He ran toward Jim and squeezed him in a bear hug. "Jim, it's so good to see you. It's been ages." "It's good to see you too, little brother. Is it all right if I stay with you for a while? I'm between jobs right now." "Shit, yeah. I'd love to catch up with you. Stay as long as you want. You're always welcome wherever I am. The place looks great." "Thanks. Let's grab your stuff and I'll show you around." "Do you remember Melody?" "Little Melody. Of course. She was your age and always crushed on me when I was in high school." "Well, she's all grown up now and I don't think she's over that crush. She'll be glad to know you're here for a visit. Maybe you'll get lucky." Chapter 5. Day 3. Big Jim awoke with the rising sun. He always had the natural ability to wake up at a time of his choosing, and Jim knew he needed an early start to the day. Tears blurred his eyes as the aftermath of last night's dream about Lily faded from memory. It would be a miracle if she were still alive. Jim grieved over the death of Melody, Mary, and all the nameless people he tried to save at the zoo. The weight of all this loss piled upon his shoulders and threatened to smother him, but Big Jim kept going. There had to be other survivors out there somewhere he could help. He just had to go out and find them. The power remained on in the house where Jim trespassed for the night. Before it failed forever, he took a hot shower and ate a hot breakfast. No saying how long this good luck would last. Jim packed the truck with all the non-perishable food, the stolen electric bike, and a Smith & Wesson .38 special he found in a nightstand in the bedroom. He hit the jackpot staying here. When he climbed into the truck, he discovered his direction of travel had in fact been southwest and not pure west as he originally thought. Big Jim decided his best designation would now be the mountains of Tennessee. They were far enough from any major city, which would be safer from any more nuclear weapon attacks and zombies. Any survivalist would pick the area too, so it was his best chance of find other people to help. The stolen F-150 ran like a champ. It had been a newer model, and the owner spared no expense with all the options on the truck. Jim still found random cars abandoned along his route, but no other traffic moved. There had to be other survivors. Around midday, he found a teenage girl hitchhiking alongside of the road. Since this was the first living person he saw since Mary, he stopped to give her a ride. "Hi, I'm Jim. I'm glad to see another survivor. Do you need a ride?" Yeah. Sure, I'm Beth. I'm glad to see you too." Jim noticed Beth didn't make eye contact with him when she spoke, and she searched for her words. She didn't appear to be a drug addict, so he thought she might only be scared traveling on her own. "Well, climb aboard then." He added a big smile, hoping to relieve her fears. Beth climbed in slowly, not like one being saved from a deserted island, but like one heading to the gas chamber. She took the passenger seat and pulled the door closed, all the while avoiding any eye contact with Jim. "I'm planning on heading to the mountains of Tennessee, and you're welcome to come with me. Otherwise, I can drop you off anywhere along the way." Jim hoped she would consent to traveling with him. He could use the company, and he would hate to doom her to a certain death. Okay. We'll see." Beth wasn't turning out to be much of a conversationalist. They drove on in silence. After entering a blind sweeping turn, she finally spoke again. "I need you to keep your hand on the steering wheel and prepare to stop. Sorry, it's just survival of the fittest." Beth pointed a Glock 30s at Jim with a shaking hand. He knew he could disarm her with little effort, and prepared to do so when he noticed the ratty pickup truck blocking the road ahead of them. Two men armed with older hunting rifles stood behind the truck. None of them were professionals, and they didn't know who they were messing with. "Beth, you don't have to do this." "Yes, I do. Those two are forcing me, and they'll kill me if I don't. Living with them isn't pleasant either, but it's better than trying to survive on my own. I could protect you. You've got 3 guns pointed at you. Just do what you're told and maybe they won't kill you." Beth's eyes danced everywhere except for looking at Jim. He took advantage of her distraction to stuff the .38 Special out of sight into the belt on his jeans. Jim had only 5 shots, but he'd make them all count. "If you give me that gun now, I'll protect you." "Don't think so. The devil you know is better than the devil you don't. I don't know what they've done to you, but I'm not like them. Not everyone is evil." She only responded with a mirthless chuckle. Big Jim eased the truck to a stop and prepared for action. "Looky air. What's you bring us, Beth?" The greasy-looking redneck standing furthest from them spoke. Even if he didn't look like it, he must be the brains of the group. "Step out slowly. Nothing stupid. Cover him, Rufus." The second man, Rufus, wore dirty overalls with a torn flannel shirt underneath. His high-fashion sense included cutting the sleeves off the shirt, making it into his own wife-beater. Jim knew there must be some symbolism there. Rufus's long beard hadn't been groomed or cleaned for months, and Jim wouldn't be surprised if lice infested it. Beth had found a couple of real winners to hang out with. Rufus approached Big Jim as he climbed out of the truck. He led the way with a beat-up bolt-action hunting rifle. Stopping short would have been smart, but neither of these guys were. Instead, Rufus jammed the barrel of the gun into Jim's chest. This was the break Jim needed. With one fluid move, Jim knocked the rifle barrel away from his chest with his right hand and drove his left through Rufus's head. The man's neck snapped at an odd angle, and he dropped to the ground in a heap. Jim's right hand continued around and pulled the .38 Special out from his belt. It looked like a cap gun in a toddler's hand, but much more deadly. He squeezed off 3 shots at the redneck who had spoken, and 2 of 3 found their mark. 2 down and still 2 rounds left in the gun. The entire battle took seconds, and Beth hadn't moved during it. Jim turned the gun on her. "You have a choice to make now, and it's an important one. Put the gun down or end up like your 2 friends." Beth's eyes still roamed the battlefield, but the gun laid impotent at her side. When she finally focused on Jim, her eyes blinked rapidly while tears formed at the edges. She stared without saying a word. "Slowly open the door and climb out of the truck. Leave the pistol behind." For a moment Beth just stared at Jim but didn't move. She was a young girl who got mixed up with two losers. Jim hoped she would comply because shooting her would be so wrong. Beth finally reached for the door handle and climbed out of the truck. He grabbed the Glock off the seat and checked the load. The magazine held bullets, but there wasn't a chambered round. He chambered a round and tucked the revolver back into his belt. Before dealing with Beth, Jim checked on the two other men to make sure they were out of the fight. The blow Rufus took did him in. Jim scrambled his brains with the powerful punch. As he moved around the ratty old pickup truck, he saw the effects of his shooting. One round hit the man's shoulder, and another drilled him through the forehead. Jim's third shot had missed. Oh well, no one was perfect. He turned back toward his stolen truck and didn't see Beth. Before he called out, he scanned the area. Beth had taken the opportunity to run while Jim's attention was elsewhere, but she didn't get far. Her corpse laid on the ground in front of the trees, being ripped apart by 3 zombies. Shit. Jim cursed out loud over the waste of another life. Everyone he met ended up cursed. There would be no helping Beth, so he climbed back into the truck and set off down the road. A few hours later, the F-150 ran low on gas and Jim came across an old gas station. Pay at the pump never came to this place, and Jim hadn't seen gas pumps like these for years. The electricity remained on, but Jim knew he had to go inside to authorize the pump. A small convenience store sat on the property, along with 2 garage stalls. It reeked of age but had been well kept. Big Jim approached the front door and found it unlocked. He led with the .38 Special, remembering it only had 2 rounds left in it. A blood trail ran from in front of the cashier stand and down the center aisle of the store. The trail led to a corpse being devoured by 2 zombies. They must have ambushed a potential customer. Not great customer service. Neither zombie sensed his presence, and they kept devouring their victims' insides. It was a gruesome sight, becoming more common with each passing day. With their backs to him, Jim drilled the 2 monsters through the back of their heads with the last 2 rounds in his gun. Their gore joined their victims on the store's floor. So much for the place being clean. As he turned back to the cashier's stand, a 3rd zombie bum rushed him. Jim could count to 5, so he knew the gun held no more rounds. It did, however, work as an effective bludgeon, and 2 quick blows to the head rendered the monster lifeless. Jim dropped the gun on the floor since he had no more ammo for it and didn't know where he'd find more. He walked around the back of the counter and authorized the pump he parked the truck in front of. Underneath the counter, Jim found a Mossberg Shorty pump shotgun with a pistol grip and a box of shells. This lifestyle of looting didn't make Jim proud, but he decided he needed to take advantage of anything he found while he could. There must be other survivors, and times would get tough quick with no new supplies being delivered. The truck, along with the 5 jerry cans he found inside the store, were filled from the gas pump out front. He loaded 5 cases of water, along with some of the healthier snack alternatives he found. Jim would be okay for weeks with the supplies he had on hand, but he still hoped to find other survivors to help. Even if his track record hadn't been good at helping people so far. Someone had to live. Jim made the border of Tennessee before having to stop again for the night. He discovered a rustic-looking log cabin well off the main road. It must have been a wealthy man's getaway since the outside looked rustic, but the interior had every luxury known to man. As Jim cleared the house, he found no signs of any recent visitors. There wasn't any stored food in the pantry, but he found a glass front gun cabinet in one room. It held 3 high-priced shotguns designed as conversation starters rather than serious weapons. A cleaning kit, along with 5 boxes of shells, were in the drawer underneath the display. Before he retired for the night, Jim tore down and cleaned the Mossberg he took from the gas station. He found the gun to be like new, so he cleaned, oiled, and reassembled it. With nothing but time, he tore Beth's Glock down too. This weapon suffered from a lack of attention, so he did the best he could with it. There were 7 rounds in the magazine and would hold on to it for now since it was easy to conceal. If he found more .45 caliber ammo, he would try to work on the gun some more. Night fell, and Jim drifted off to sleep in the 2nd-floor bedroom. There was only one bedroom upstairs, and he used furniture to secure his location. This was the best he could do since he needed to rest and remained alone. With all the action and pain of the last 3 days, Jim fell into a deep sleep. He programmed his internal clock to wake him up at dawn to get an early start on the day. Chapter 6. Day 4. A creak from the floorboards downstairs roused Big Jim from sleep. He grabbed the Mossberg and rolled to the side of the bed, away from the door. Whispered voices came from the first floor, but Jim couldn't understand the words they spoke. From their movements he knew there were 2 intruders, and they were both untrained and undisciplined. The advantage of surprise, elevation, and training all went to Jim, but he was reluctant to be responsible for more death. Jim tried to defuse the situation. "Hi, my name is Jim. I'm no threat to you. Come out where I can see you and I won't hurt you." All sounds of movement below stopped with the echoing of his voice within the cabin. It took a few moments before anyone responded. "Nice try, buddy. We're armed and we want your stuff. Give it up and we'll let you live." Another short whispered conversation followed the man's voice. Even with the quiet inside the structure, he couldn't catch the words, but he recognized the second voice as female. "Sorry, I'm not giving up my stuff. However, I'm willing to work with you and share. There's safety in numbers." The man laughed before responding. "Work together. Share. You're funny. This is how it's going to work. Throw down the keys to the truck and we'll let you escape with your life. You're outnumbered and we're armed. There's no escape for you. Look, I've been patient with you and kind. I will not give you the keys, and if you try to come up here, I'll kill you. I've offered you a chance to survive together, either take it or walk away now. Otherwise my patience will end and you will die." More urgent whispers came from the female voice. Jim still couldn't understand her words, but the tone implied a critical message. The floorboards creaked again, signifying further movement. He laid the shotgun down at his side and aimed the Glock down the stairs. Neither were effective long-range weapons, but he guessed the .45 caliber rounds would do more damage even being fired from the short barrel. A dark figure appeared at the bottom of the steps. "Stop!" Jim shouted with his most commanding voice, but it didn't stop the charge. He aimed down at the figure and pulled the trigger. It took 4 rounds from the Glock to stop the figure's advance. Dawn was coming, but not enough light entered the house for Jim to see where the bullets hit. The body slid down the steps, not trying to arrest their fall, so Jim expected the rounds had been fatal. A woman's voice called out from the first floor. "Please don't shoot. I told Mike this was a stupid idea. My son and I will leave. Just please don't hurt us." Jim pocketed the Glock and picked up the shotgun. "What's your name?" "Ha. My name is Nancy and my son is Chris. Mike was my neighbor and he said he would take care of us. I never should have trusted him." "Are you or Chris armed?" "No, of course not. Chris is only 5 years old." "Okay. I'm going to come downstairs. Stand where I can see you with your hands visible in front of you. I won't hurt you, but I have to make sure I'm safe too. Do you understand? Look, just let us go. You'll never see us again. Leaving is your choice, but you don't have to go. I won't hurt you, and we can work together." That's what Mike said, and all it got me was raped for the last 3 nights and now almost killed. "Not all men are like that, Nancy." She laughed a mirthless laugh. "What, are you gay then?" "No. But not all men rape women and steal from others. Some have morals and live by a code." "How can you say that when you just shot Mike?" "I gave him every chance to give up first, but he wouldn't, so I had to kill him in self-defense. You'd be free to go at any time, but I wish you'd consider the alternative of going it alone." Nancy didn't respond, and Jim wasn't sure if she had left or planned her own ambush. He couldn't let this go on forever, so he eased down the stairs toward the direction her voice had come from. Jim turned the corner at the bottom of the steps and came face to face with a woman pointing a hunting rifle at him. She was shorter than Jim but tall compared to most women and had long greasy black hair. If she wasn't wearing the weight of the apocalypse on her shoulders, people would consider her pretty. They both stood across from each other, pointing their weapons. Big Jim recognized the rifle from the glass cabinet in the other room, so he wasn't worried about being shot. "Have you ever used a gun before?" "Yes, and I'm not afraid to shoot you." The shaking of the barrel of the rifle betrayed her attempt at the brave words. "Then I'm sure you checked that weapon before you removed it from the cabinet." "Of course. Why would you ask me that?" Nancy swallowed hard and frowned after she spoke. "Because you took it from the cabinet in the other room. The owner of this house is more into looks than hunting, since none of those rifles were loaded. As a matter of fact, the one you're holding isn't even capable of firing a round." Her shoulders drooped, and the barrel of the rifle dropped toward the floor. Jim closed the distance and took it out of her hands. Nancy slumped to her knees, and the tears fell. After hearing her story about being raped, Jim wasn't sure if he should comfort her or let her be. He hadn't been trained as a psychiatrist. "I know you've been through a lot. I want to help you and Chris. I won't hurt either of you. Where is he?" Nancy's chest heaved, and the sobbing intensified. Jim had empathy, but he didn't know how to help this woman. Some might put a bullet in her head and move on, but even though Jim had killed others, he wasn't a cold-blooded murderer. While she continued to cry, Jim scanned the room looking for a 5-year-old boy. Where could he be hiding? Based upon his age, probably anywhere. "I really want to help you, but we should make sure Chris is safe first. Where is he?" "He's dead." The sobs intensified again as Nancy delivered her grim message. "Shit." Her words hit him harder than a punch to the solar plexus. Jim decided to let her cry it out on her own. He wrapped Mike's body in a sheet and carried it outside. One round had punched through Mike's neck, one had punctured his chest, and a third entered through his jaw and exited the top of his head. The chest shot must have stopped his heart since he had bled only a little. The fourth had missed, but Jim considered it good shooting in the dark with a subcompact pistol. Since he didn't plan on making this home, he stashed the body behind the house out of sight. No need to bury the scumbag. When Jim returned to the house, Nancy had stopped crying, but she laid in a heap on the floor. He helped her up from the floor and onto the sofa. Nancy didn't resist his efforts to help her up, but she collapsed onto the sofa as soon as he put her down. "I'm going to make myself some breakfast. Do you want anything?" She didn't respond, only stared off into the distance with a blank expression. Jim didn't know what she saw there, if anything. He left a bottle of water on the coffee table in front of her, and he hoped she would drink it. In the kitchen, Jim prepared himself a breakfast from the supplies he had pilfered. Jim made toast from a loaf of bread he liberated from the gas station store, and covered it with strawberry jelly and chunky peanut butter. It wasn't gourmet, but far from the worst breakfast he had ever eaten. While he ate, Jim tried to decide the best course of action. He could leave Nancy behind or force her into the truck to head out. Both seemed like poor options to him. The only remaining option required him to stay put for the day and see if he could build up some trust with Nancy before moving out. That way, she could decide what she wanted to do. When Jim returned to the living room, he noticed Nancy had stopped crying and sat up on the sofa. He handed her a peanut butter and jelly sandwich he had made for her. "I hope you're not allergic to peanut butter. There isn't an enormous variety of breakfast choices." Nancy took the plate from him and ate. She ate slow, chewing each bite thoroughly before taking another. Jim knew nothing about her or how to deal with people who recently experienced traumatic events, so he did not understand if her reactions were normal. "I don't know what you've experienced or heard, but the world has gone to hell. The dawn of the dead struck first while I was in D.C. I escaped the city just before a nuke leveled it. My plan is to get to the mountains in Tennessee. That should be far enough from any major city, and with any luck I can find more survivors. You're welcome to come with me or go your own way. Your choice." Nancy stared at Jim but said nothing. She continued to methodically eat her sandwich and drink her water. Her lack of response put Jim on edge. He felt the urgency to move on, but didn't want to leave Nancy behind. "Why don't you think about it while I finish packing my stuff?" Still no response. Nancy just stared at Jim like he was an animal on display at the zoo. Jim went upstairs to pack the few things he had left in the bedroom. If she didn't snap out of this soon, he didn't know what to do with Nancy. As he returned to the living room, he found the sofa empty except for Nancy's clothes. What the hell? The sound of singing came from outside of the open door. Jim didn't remember leaving the door open. He looked outside and Nancy skipped around the yard singing at the top of her lungs, buck naked. Shit. Jim raced toward the door, and before he could get there, a zombie emerged from the tree line and tackled naked Nancy, pushing her to the ground. It bit down on her neck and pulled a chunk of flesh from her body. The zombie's buddy joined him for the feast of Nancy. She was beyond saving now, so Jim grabbed his stuff and drove away from the log cabin. This once peaceful retreat had become the place of nightmares. The rest of the day passed with no other drama. Jim wasn't sure how much more death he could handle. He came to a large town which sat in a valley surrounded by mountains. With no clear destination in mind, he decided this was as good a place as any to stop. A 2-story house sat on an elevated lot overlooking the entire town, and Big Jim made it home base. At least for now. It provided him the ability to observe any activity taking place in the empty community below. There had to be other survivors out there Jim could help. He just had to find them. An oversized 3-car garage occupied the back corner of the lot. After Jim cleared the house, he parked the F-150 in the garage in the one open bay. The other 2 bays held a newer Honda SUV and a restored 1967 GTO convertible. Jim's eyes lingered on the GTO, but there would be time later to check it out. Electricity had gone off here, but someone had equipped this house with solar panels and a battery bank to provide power overnight. Jim would have to be careful, since turning the lights on would be an invitation to trouble. He wanted to find a group of survivors to help, but he knew human nature. Humans are naturally evil, and this base motivation will drive them to do terrible things to each other with the fall of civilization. Big Jim might be a giant, but he couldn't take on the world. After being woken up by intruders early this morning, Jim took a page from Home Alone and left some surprises for any would-be visitors. Good thing Jim wasn't a sleepwalker, or he would have gotten a painful wake-up call. The home's master bedroom had a walkout balcony overlooking the town. It provided an excellent perch for him to view any activity on the streets below. He moved the bed so he could see outside while laying down. Being surrounded by death had exhausted him. Sleep claimed him quickly, and Jim slept soundly until dawn. Chapter 7. 2 years earlier. Big Jim had never planned on becoming a farmer again, but here he was a year after his retirement. His brother Judd grew corn on all of his 350 acres on his Iowa farm. Jim's plans had been to stay and visit while he got his head and life together. Lily leaving him and the end of his service in the Problem Solvers left an unexpected hole in his life. If he told the truth, the farm hadn't kept him in Iowa this past year. His time in the Problem Solvers left him with the resources to do anything or go anywhere he wanted. Jim loved his little brother, but Judd's presence didn't hold him here either. Hard work recharged and strengthened the body, but physical training could be found anywhere. Jim spent most of the last year restoring his dad's old GTO, but Jim's hobby didn't lock him in Iowa either. What kept him on his brother's farm was Melody. When he had been a senior in high school and the starting quarterback, Melody had been the awkward junior high school girl who crushed on Jim. He enjoyed her company at the time, but thought of her as way too young. A star quarterback should think about all the college women he would soon date. In the time of Jim's absence, Melody had grown into a beautiful woman, and the 4-year difference in their ages didn't seem quite so large now. Judd had given Melody a call during Jim's first week in Iowa, and she had been a fixture at the farm ever since. and electricity flowed between the two when their eyes first met, and now, they were engaged to be married. Jim didn't understand Melody's desire to be a vegetarian, but he respected her for it. You didn't get to be Jim's size, being too particular about what type or amount of food you ate. She didn't criticize Jim for eating meat, but he kept the meat lovers pizza night for him and Judd during one of their rare evenings alone. He honored her desires and didn't want to make her feel uncomfortable in his presence. What they would eat once married would be a different story. This was one of those meat lovers pizza nights that Jim and Judd enjoyed together. 2 large pizzas decked out with pepperoni, sausage, meatballs and veggies sat before them along with their ice-cold beers. So, when are you going to make Melody an honest woman? She wants to wait until after the harvest 2 years from now. Her parents will retire by then, and that will finish their time on the farm. I love having both of you around, and you can stay as long as you like. However, the corn is my responsibility. You don't have to worry about it. I'd be happy to buy her parents out and let them get on with their retirement. You know them, Judd. They have a lot of pride and feel like they need to put the time in. I'm sure you'll eventually get all the land, but they won't retire early. Yes, some generations had pride in a job well done. Let them know my offer is serious, and they could get a jump start on shuffleboard in Florida. Jim laughed. Could you imagine those two actually playing shuffleboard in Florida? The image of 2 retired corn farmers from Iowa playing shuffleboard caused them both to roar with laughter. Jim relished this time with his brother after Judd lived through the pain caused by his absence because of his career in the Problem Solvers. Even his brother had no idea what Jim did for work the last 15 years. What are you and Melody going to do once you're married? I don't think we've figured it out yet. I've got my retirement from the Marines, and I saved some money while I was in. Maybe we'll buy a corn farm. Judd enjoyed another hearty laugh after Jim's comments. Stop, you're killing me. I'm not sure what's funnier. Melody's parents playing shuffleboard, or you farming corn the rest of your life. Well, Melody is a vegetarian. How else am I going to feed her? I think vegetarians eat more than corn. Dad's GTO is looking good. You've spent a few bucks fixing it up. Thanks. It's my little tribute to Dad. I want to make his car look like it did when he bought it new. I'm glad you hung on to it. I knew the car held a special place for both you and Dad. When he passed, I didn't have the heart to get rid of it. Sorry I wasn't here when he passed. Jim, you weren't here when Mom passed either. Your military service was always more important than us. Judd, I'm sorry. You keep saying that, Jim. Maybe someday you'll actually believe it too. Thanks for the pizza. It's time for bed. Judd, wait. Judd stood up and stomped away from the table. He inherited the same fiery temper both Jim and their father had. Jim learned how to harness it to survive during the tough missions the Problem Solvers sent him on. Uncontrolled emotions would have gotten him killed. There would be no going back in time, but Jim wished he could relive the past and make different decisions this time. He let both his mom and Judd down by being AWOL during both funerals. Big Jim swore he wouldn't let his brother down again, but he didn't know how to make up for the lost time. To burn off the negative energy of the evening, Jim cleaned the kitchen and then took the GTO out for a ride. The 400 cubic inch engine roared to life and produced a symphony from the twin tailpipes. Jim shifted into first and mashed the gas pedal, leaving twin streaks of rubber in Judd's driveway. Judd might get pissed in the morning, but he should be used to his big brother's childish behavior with muscle cars by this point. Shifting into second gear produced a chirp of the rear tires. The GTO looked stock, but Jim hot-rodded the Pontiac's drivetrain beyond his dad's efforts. He enjoyed driving fast and taking risks. For most people, danger produced fear, but for Jim it produced euphoria. He drove the car right to its limits along the deserted country roads. Traffic laws were lax here because only corn farms, for as far as the eye could see, lined the streets in this part of Iowa. No one would even notice the GTO as it streaked by at triple-digit speeds. Clutch, brake, shift, and stomp on the gas again. The comforting actions of driving allowed Jim to clear his head and think. He had been too self-focused all his life. He wanted to serve. He wanted to save the world. What had it gotten him? Jim missed out on burying his parents and had a brother who resented his absence. He'd give back the $10 million and the retirement to change the past, but going back was impossible. You can't ever atone for the bad things you've done. You can only move forward and try to make better decisions next time. Big Jim swore he would do things differently, this time with both Melody and his brother. He'd be there for both of them, and he'd help rather than hurt other people. It was a new day and a new attitude for a new man. Chapter 8. Day 5. After the nightmare of awakening to Nancy and her captor the previous day, Big Jim appreciated the quiet he found this new morning. The sun broke over the horizon of the clear blue sky, signifying another warm summer day. He scanned the town and found nothing out of place during this early hour. A pleasant way to start the day with no trouble. Jim still hoped to find a group of survivors he could help and protect. His experience as a farmer and a warrior held remarkable value in this dead world. Small groups of zombies roamed the streets below haphazardly, and Jim decided he would deal with them after he ate breakfast. A breakfast of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, again. He'd check for some proper food while he eliminated the zombies wandering around town. Jim knew he wouldn't find a meat lover's pizza, but anything would taste better than PB&J. While eating, Jim checked the television and radio for any programming. The house's solar system provided adequate power for all the home's needs. He turned on the TV first and found nothing but static as Jim clicked through the channels. Finding the morning show playing and life carrying on normally in another part of the country was too much to hope for. Jim moved to the radio and discovered the same lack of signal, except for one station at the extreme end of the AM band. It played the same pre-recorded message on a continuous loop. When the siren sounds, proceed in an orderly fashion to your local evacuation assembly point. For your safety, do not bring weapons. The military working with local law enforcement will have the area secured. Do not bring food. They will provide for you in the government's sanctuary camps. Your government has the terrorist threat isolated and neutralized. This mandatory evacuation is for your safety while agents round up the remaining enemy combatants. The sanctuary camps will be your temporary oasis during the last phase of Operation Z. Jim laughed out loud at the message. An oasis? They have the threat isolated? He wondered if anyone bought this obvious propaganda. Was anyone left to even consider the message? The grim thought wiped the smile from Jim's face. No sense waiting for help to come, Jim would make his own help today. Before he headed into town to start his work, Jim climbed the stairs to the bedroom for one last look from the balcony. He didn't expect to see law enforcement or government officials, but he wanted to minimize the chance of any surprises waiting for him. When he served in the Problem Solvers, he had been a part of a four-man team. Here Jim had no backup, so he needed to rely on his skills alone. No living humans present, but Jim counted 27 zombies. They roamed the streets in small groups with no discernible purpose, like teenagers on a Friday night before the world fell. He assumed there would be more zombies waiting down there outside of his view. Better to predict trouble and not find it than to be surprised. The keys for the GTO hung from a hook on the wall in the home's mudroom. Jim found an 18-inch billhook saw in the garage, and he packed it along with the Mossberg for his trip into town. He turned the key, and the Pontiac V8 roared to life with a satisfying rumble coming from the dual exhaust. If you're going to kill zombies in a new town, then you might as well do it in style. With the top down, the wind blew through Jim's hair, bringing back memories of driving his dad's GTO in Iowa. Jim had restored and hot-rodded it to honor his father's memory, but it was a hardtop with a 4-speed manual transmission. This car flew, and Jim wondered if the previous owner replaced the 400 with a later model 455 cubic inch engine. He imagined driving through the Iowa farmland in better times, rather than heading into an unknown town in Tennessee to slaughter flesh-eating monsters. Jim sped down the town's main street and screeched to a stop next to a gang of 5 zombies. He leapt from the car and put the billhook saw into action. 5 compact swings and 5 corpses decorated the street. The GTO's engine snarled its eagerness for further action, and Jim spun the tires as he closed on the next group. A repeat of the results for the first group, except there were only 4 monsters loitering here. For the next hour and a half, Jim screamed through the town with the GTO littering the ground with zombie bodies. He'd have to find some heavy equipment later to clean up the rotting corpses before they stank. The town's DOT was currently on a permanent vacation and wouldn't be handling cleanup. After 2 days of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, Jim checked out the local grocery store to find some decent food. The main electricity feed had been out at the house Jim commandeered, so it surprised him when the store's door slid open in front of him. He carried the Mossberg in front of him in a ready position, and found every other light illuminated inside the store. A backup power source kept things operational, so Jim decided to take advantage of this while he could. Cold beer and steak went into his cart for the quick trip home. He packed the remaining meat into the freezers, hoping to preserve it for as long as possible. Jim would eat like a king, at least for today. His euphoria turned to caution when he found 3 teenagers standing outside the store near the GTO. 2 males and 1 female. They carried a couple of baseball bats and a machete with them. "Hi there. Do you like the car?" All 3 flinched when Jim spoke. "It's a '67 Goat. What's not to like?" One of the 2 boys spoke with a smile on his face. "Cool. You're a car guy. Are the 3 of you from around here?" 3 sets of eyes darted about, but no one responded to his question. "That's all right. You don't have to say. Look, there's plenty of food inside the store. I'm going to cook up some steaks. I could grab a few more and cook them for the 3 of you too." "No thanks. We're doing fine on our own." The same boy spoke a second time. He must be the leader of the group. "I can see you're doing okay. There's strength in numbers though. We could work together." "We could just take your stuff, old man. We'll let you go this time, but don't let us see you around again anymore." The girl hugged herself while the other boy looked everywhere except at Jim. "Please don't be stupid. I don't want to hurt any of you. As a matter of fact, I'd like to help you. But please don't push me to defend myself. It would end badly for the 3 of you." All 3 looked at each other and then turned and ran away from Jim. "Shit," he said to himself. Then he yelled after the kids. "When you're ready, I'll be glad to help you." Jim stood staring in the direction they had run off in, but he now stood all alone in the street. He loaded the groceries into the car and used the power of the big V8 to spin the car around in the middle of the street. The move would have gotten him a ticket before the end of civilization, but no one noticed now. With the wind in his hair and the roar of the engine, Jim raced back toward his home to make a satisfying lunch and ponder his next move. He now knew for sure there were other survivors, and he wanted to find them and help. There's nothing like fresh grilled steak, and Jim relished every bite. He found an expensive propane grill set up behind the house, and Jim put it to work on his prized meal. The steak and the cold beer tasted like heaven on this hot and humid summer day. If zombies didn't roam the earth, it would be a wonderful vacation for Jim. So far the day had been successful. Fewer zombies roamed free, and Jim knew of one group of survivors out there. The 3 teenagers acted tough but showed their fear when he confronted them. Jim wondered if they were alone or if they had a larger group somewhere nearby. He'd keep his eyes open because a scared enemy could make stupid decisions. Hurting a group of scared teenagers who were trying to survive was the last thing he wanted to do. A more pressing need was to find a piece of heavy equipment. There were a bunch of zombie corpses rotting in the streets, and the smell in town would only grow worse from their further decay. Disease spread via dead bodies, so he needed to prevent that issue too. Where do you find a backhoe? The town's garage might have one, but where was it located? Random driving around the town and hoping for the best would be a poor plan, so Jim needed something better. After cleaning up the mess from his lunch, Jim searched the house for any clues. In a drawer within a hall table, he found a local phone book and a paper map of the town. The blue pages in the thin phone book displayed the numbers and addresses for the local town government facilities. It turned out Jim now lived in Waresville Valley, Tennessee. His town was unknown no more. He paged through the phone book and found the address of the town's public works building. The map placed it on the outskirts of town, on the opposite end of town from Jim's place. Shit, it would have to be across town. Out of habit, Jim expressed his frustration out loud, even though no one could hear him speak. It was early afternoon, so there were several hours of daylight left. No time like the present to head out. Which vehicle should he take? After an internal debate, he took the Honda across town. If he found a backhoe, he'd have to leave the vehicle behind, and both the GTO and pickup truck were too valuable to him. The Honda CR-V had a full tank of gas, so the trip through town wouldn't tax the small SUV. His drive didn't take long, and he came across no new zombies or other survivors. Jim's extermination trip during the morning rid the town of the walking dead, at least temporarily. It's possible to claim back the world one town at a time. Waresville Valley, Tennessee Public Works read the sign in front of the small garage building. No one would confuse this town with a big city, and this place reflected that fact. The building's front contained 4 rolling garage doors and a single man-sized door with the words "Office" written over top of it. Jim planned on entering through the office door and checking out the equipment housed inside. If the garage doors had been glass, he would have looked inside, but all 3 doors were solid. There were no signs of any backup power source, so it would be total darkness inside of the building. A simple lock set with a deadbolt locked the office door. Jim didn't bother looking for a hidden key, but drove his size 15 foot through the door. Wood splintered, and the door flew open and the scent of death washed over Jim. He hefted the billhook saw and entered the building. A decaying body laid on the floor behind the front desk. Both zombie and rodent teeth marks covered the remains. Shit. Big Jim walked around the back of the desk and the corpse snapped at him. The remnant of the body still longed for living human flesh, even though its arms and legs were chewed off. He flinched at the sight before bringing his boot down and flattening the skull, ending this freak of nature. A small office at the back of the entry area was empty of any other monsters or bodies. The second door opened into the garage area, and Jim knew he'd find more monsters there. Someone had chewed on their office coworker, and the outside door had been both closed and locked. He peered through the door's window and found the garage area shrouded in a murky light. Small windows ringed the top of the garage structure, but no one cleaned them during the last decade. The garage held 3 dump trucks, a backhoe, a loader, and a street sweeper. Why didn't he bring a flashlight with him? Jim's simple plan had him entering the garage and then opening the closest garage door. Light from outside would illuminate the space, and he could then see all threats hidden in the shadows. Not much of a plan, but this wasn't exactly mission impossible. Deferred maintenance extended to the passage door, and the hinges screeched forth Jim's intentions. Moans came from the other side of the garage telling him he wasn't alone, but he had expected nothing less. He let the door close and eased down the walkway next to the first dump truck. Jim's eyes bounced both directions, waiting for the oncoming threat to appear. It didn't take long. Zombie number 1 bum rushed him from the back of the truck, and a quick swipe of the billhook dropped his would-be attacker. The second came from behind while Jim dealt with the first. It lunged face first at his back, causing Jim to take a step forward, crashing into the truck. His luck held because the zombie never got his teeth on Jim's skin, but it had knocked the saw from his hand. With an enormous fist, Big Jim punched the monster in the chest, knocking it back. A living man would gasp for breath, but the dead no longer breathed. Without taking a break, it lunged again at Jim. He brought up the Mossberg and fired, hitting the zombie in the chest. The zombie staggered for a second, which allowed Jim to pump a second shell into the receiver. Jim fired a second time and melted its face with the buckshot. 2 threats neutralized in about 10 seconds. Big Jim cleared the rest of the garage area and found no other dead men walking. The town's population of the living may not be increasing, but the population of the dead had decreased thanks to Jim. Big Jim found the keys to all the equipment in the office area. The backhoe sat on a trailer hooked to the dump truck parked in the middle bay. It was a similar model to the backhoe his brother Judd had on the farm, so Jim would have no problem operating it. He started by burying the 3 bodies at the Public Works building, and then headed into town to dispose of the rest of his kills. By the time he finished body disposal duty, the sun had dropped in the sky. After another quick stop at the grocery store, Jim returned home for the evening. He smiled, looking back at the highlights of the day. Waresville Valley, Tennessee, had a much smaller population of the dead. Jim wouldn't be able to eliminate them all himself unless he walled the place in. Other survivors were living in town too, so Jim wasn't alone. Now he had to build trust with the group so he could help them. Chapter 8. Day 5. After the nightmare of awakening to Nancy and her captor the previous day, Big Jim appreciated the quiet he found this new morning. The sun broke over the horizon of the clear blue sky, signifying another warm summer day. He scanned the town and found nothing out of place during this early hour. A pleasant way to start the day with no trouble. Jim still hoped to find a group of survivors he could help and protect. His experience as a farmer and a warrior held remarkable value in this dead world. Small groups of zombies roamed the streets below haphazardly, and Jim decided he would deal with them after he ate breakfast. A breakfast of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, again. He'd check for some proper food while he eliminated the zombies wandering around town. Jim knew he wouldn't find a meat lover's pizza, but anything would taste better than PB&J. While eating, Jim checked the television and radio for any programming. The house's solar system provided adequate power for all the home's needs. He turned on the TV first and found nothing but static as Jim clicked through the channels. Finding the morning show playing and life carrying on normally in another part of the country was too much to hope for. Jim moved to the radio and discovered the same lack of signal, except for one station at the extreme end of the AM band. It played the same pre-recorded message on a continuous loop. When the siren sounds, proceed in an orderly fashion to your local evacuation assembly point. For your safety, do not bring weapons. The military working with local law enforcement will have the area secured. Do not bring food. They will provide for you in the government's sanctuary camps. Your government has the terrorist threat isolated and neutralized. This mandatory evacuation is for your safety while agents round up the remaining enemy combatants. The sanctuary camps will be your temporary oasis during the last phase of Operation Z. Jim laughed out loud at the message. An oasis? They have the threat isolated? He wondered if anyone bought this obvious propaganda. Was anyone left to even consider the message? The grim thought wiped the smile from Jim's face. No sense waiting for help to come, Jim would make his own help today. Before he headed into town to start his work, Jim climbed the stairs to the bedroom for one last look from the balcony. He didn't expect to see law enforcement or government officials, but he wanted to minimize the chance of any surprises waiting for him. When he served in the Problem Solvers, he had been a part of a 4-man team. Here Jim had no backup, so he needed to rely on his skills alone. No living humans present, but Jim counted 27 zombies. They roamed the streets in small groups with no discernible purpose, like teenagers on a Friday night before the world fell. He assumed there would be more zombies waiting down there outside of his view. Better to predict trouble and not find it than to be surprised. The keys for the GTO hung from a hook on the wall in the home's mudroom. Jim found an 18-inch billhook saw in the garage, and he packed it along with the Mossberg for his trip into town. He turned the key, and the Pontiac V8 roared to life with a satisfying rumble coming from the dual exhaust. If you're going to kill zombies in a new town, then you might as well do it in style. With the top down, the wind blew through Jim's hair, bringing back memories of driving his dad's GTO in Iowa. Jim had restored and hot-rodded it to honor his father's memory, but it was a hardtop with a 4-speed manual transmission. This car flew, and Jim wondered if the previous owner replaced the 400 with a later model 455 cubic inch engine. He imagined driving through the Iowa farmland in better times, rather than heading into an unknown town in Tennessee to slaughter flesh-eating monsters. Jim sped down the town's main street and screeched to a stop next to a gang of 5 zombies. He leapt from the car and put the billhook saw into action. 5 compact swings and 5 corpses decorated the street. The GTO's engine snarled its eagerness for further action, and Jim spun the tires as he closed on the next group. A repeat of the results for the first group, except there were only 4 monsters loitering here. For the next hour and a half, Jim screamed through the town with the GTO littering the ground with zombie bodies. He'd have to find some heavy equipment later to clean up the rotting corpses before they stank. The town's DOT was currently on a permanent vacation and wouldn't be handling cleanup. After 2 days of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, Jim checked out the local grocery store to find some decent food. The main electricity feed had been out at the house Jim commandeered, so it surprised him when the store's door slid open in front of him. He carried the Mossberg in front of him in a ready position, and found every other light illuminated inside the store. A backup power source kept things operational, so Jim decided to take advantage of this while he could. Cold beer and steak went into his cart for the quick trip home. He packed the remaining meat into the freezers, hoping to preserve it for as long as possible. Jim would eat like a king, at least for today. His euphoria turned to caution when he found 3 teenagers standing outside the store near the GTO. 2 males and 1 female. They carried a couple of baseball bats and a machete with them. "Hi there. Do you like the car?" All 3 flinched when Jim spoke. "It's a '67 Goat. What's not to like?" One of the 2 boys spoke with a smile on his face. "Cool. You're a car guy. Are the 3 of you from around here?" 3 sets of eyes darted about, but no one responded to his question. "That's all right. You don't have to say. Look, there's plenty of food inside the store. I'm going to cook up some steaks. I could grab a few more and cook them for the 3 of you too." "No thanks. We're doing fine on our own." The same boy spoke a second time. He must be the leader of the group. "I can see you're doing okay. There's strength in numbers though. We could work together." "We could just take your stuff, old man. We'll let you go this time, but don't let us see you around again anymore." The girl hugged herself while the other boy looked everywhere except at Jim. "Please don't be stupid. I don't want to hurt any of you. As a matter of fact, I'd like to help you. But please don't push me to defend myself. It would end badly for the 3 of you." All 3 looked at each other and then turned and ran away from Jim. "Shit," he said to himself. Then he yelled after the kids. "When you're ready, I'll be glad to help you." Jim stood staring in the direction they had run off in, but he now stood all alone in the street. He loaded the groceries into the car and used the power of the big V8 to spin the car around in the middle of the street. The move would have gotten him a ticket before the end of civilization, but no one noticed now. With the wind in his hair and the roar of the engine, Jim raced back toward his home to make a satisfying lunch and ponder his next move. He now knew for sure there were other survivors, and he wanted to find them and help. There's nothing like fresh grilled steak, and Jim relished every bite. He found an expensive propane grill set up behind the house, and Jim put it to work on his prized meal. The steak and the cold beer tasted like heaven on this hot and humid summer day. If zombies didn't roam the earth, it would be a wonderful vacation for Jim. So far the day had been successful. Fewer zombies roamed free, and Jim knew of one group of survivors out there. The 3 teenagers acted tough but showed their fear when he confronted them. Jim wondered if they were alone or if they had a larger group somewhere nearby. He'd keep his eyes open because a scared enemy could make stupid decisions. Hurting a group of scared teenagers who were trying to survive was the last thing he wanted to do. A more pressing need was to find a piece of heavy equipment. There were a bunch of zombie corpses rotting in the streets, and the smell in town would only grow worse from their further decay. Disease spread via dead bodies, so he needed to prevent that issue too. Where do you find a backhoe? The town's garage might have one, but where was it located? Random driving around the town and hoping for the best would be a poor plan, so Jim needed something better. After cleaning up the mess from his lunch, Jim searched the house for any clues. In a drawer within a hall table, he found a local phone book and a paper map of the town. The blue pages in the thin phone book displayed the numbers and addresses for the local town government facilities. It turned out Jim now lived in Waresville Valley, Tennessee. His town was unknown no more. He paged through the phone book and found the address of the town's public works building. The map placed it on the outskirts of town, on the opposite end of town from Jim's place. Shit, it would have to be across town. Out of habit, Jim expressed his frustration out loud, even though no one could hear him speak. It was early afternoon, so there were several hours of daylight left. No time like the present to head out. Which vehicle should he take? After an internal debate, he took the Honda across town. If he found a backhoe, he'd have to leave the vehicle behind, and both the GTO and pickup truck were too valuable to him. The Honda CR-V had a full tank of gas, so the trip through town wouldn't tax the small SUV. His drive didn't take long, and he came across no new zombies or other survivors. Jim's extermination trip during the morning rid the town of the walking dead, at least temporarily. It's possible to claim back the world one town at a time. Waresville Valley, Tennessee Public Works read the sign in front of the small garage building. No one would confuse this town with a big city, and this place reflected that fact. The building's front contained 4 rolling garage doors and a single man-sized door with the words "office" written over top of it. Jim planned on entering through the office door and checking out the equipment housed inside. If the garage doors had been glass, he would have looked inside, but all 3 doors were solid. There were no signs of any backup power source, so it would be total darkness inside of the building. A simple lock set with a deadbolt locked the office door. Jim didn't bother looking for a hidden key, but drove his size 15-foot through the door. Wood splintered, and the door flew open and the scent of death washed over Jim. He hefted the billhook saw and entered the building. A decaying body laid on the floor behind the front desk. Both zombie and rodent teeth marks covered the remains. Shit. Big Jim walked around the back of the desk and the corpse snapped at him. The remnant of the body still longed for living human flesh, even though its arms and legs were chewed off. He flinched at the sight before bringing his boot down and flattening the skull, ending this freak of nature. A small office at the back of the entry area was empty of any other monsters or bodies. The second door opened into the garage area, and Jim knew he'd find more monsters there. Someone had chewed on their office coworker, and the outside door had been both closed and locked. He peered through the door's window and found the garage area shrouded in a murky light. Small windows ringed the top of the garage structure, but no one cleaned them during the last decade. The garage held 3 dump trucks, a backhoe, a loader, and a street sweeper. Why didn't he bring a flashlight with him? Jim's simple plan had him entering the garage and then opening the closest garage door. Light from outside would illuminate the space, and he could then see all threats hidden in the shadows. Not much of a plan, but this wasn't exactly mission impossible. Deferred maintenance extended to the passage door, and the hinges screeched forth Jim's intentions. Moans came from the other side of the garage telling him he wasn't alone, but he had expected nothing less. He let the door close and eased down the walkway next to the first dump truck. Jim's eyes bounced both directions, waiting for the oncoming threat to appear. It didn't take long. Zombie number 1 bum rushed him from the back of the truck, and a quick swipe of the billhook dropped his would-be attacker. The second came from behind while Jim dealt with the first. It lunged face first at his back, causing Jim to take a step forward, crashing into the truck. His luck held because the zombie never got his teeth on Jim's skin, but it had knocked the saw from his hand. With an enormous fist, Big Jim punched the monster in the chest, knocking it back. A living man would gasp for breath, but the dead no longer breathed. Without taking a break, it lunged again at Jim. He brought up the Mossberg and fired, hitting the zombie in the chest. The zombie staggered for a second, which allowed Jim to pump a second shell into the receiver. Jim fired a second time and melted its face with the buckshot. 2 threats neutralized in about 10 seconds. Big Jim cleared the rest of the garage area and found no other dead men walking. The town's population of the living may not be increasing, but the population of the dead had decreased thanks to Jim. Big Jim found the keys to all the equipment in the office area. The backhoe sat on a trailer hooked to the dump truck parked in the middle bay. It was a similar model to the backhoe his brother Judd had on the farm, so Jim would have no problem operating it. He started by burying the 3 bodies at the Public Works building, and then headed into town to dispose of the rest of his kills. By time he finished body disposal duty, the sun had dropped in the sky. After another quick stop at the grocery store, Jim returned home for the evening. He smiled, looking back at the highlights of the day. Waresville Valley, Tennessee, had a much smaller population of the dead. Jim wouldn't be able to eliminate them all himself unless he walled the place in. Other survivors were living in town too, so Jim wasn't alone. Now he had to build trust with the group so he could help them. Chapter 9. Day 6. Big Jim awoke with the rising sun, feeling well rested and ready to face another day in his adopted town of Waresville Valley, Tennessee. The Weather Network stopped broadcasting almost a week ago, so Jim had to read the morning sky to determine the day's weather. A mostly clear baby blue sky had the first indications of dark clouds forming. Wonder what Al Ricker would say about the day. There were a few random zombies roaming the town, and Jim estimated the number to be around 10. It had been an improvement from the previous day, so Jim's efforts of cleaning up the town had paid off. Now he needed to figure out how to make the town secure to keep the monsters out. He had some ideas on how, so Jim needed to visit the town's garage again. Breakfast this morning included bacon and eggs pilfered from the grocery store. A tremendous improvement after eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches the last few mornings. The food would start to spoil soon and then would run out, so Jim had to work to locate additional food sources. Good thing he grew up on a corn farm and understood how to grow his own food. Jim had to secure the area before he could start farming, because an unprotected field would be a target for both unfriendly humans and the wandering dead. Before heading out to start the day's work, Jim took one last look at the town from the balcony off his bedroom. Besides the roaming zombies from earlier, there was nothing new to see. Wonder what happened to those 3 teenagers. When they ran off, it disappointed Big Jim because he knew strength came in numbers, and those 3 lacked the skills needed for long-term survival. He had left the backhoe parked in town last night and drove the dump truck back to the house. Jim would love to take the GTO out for a joyride again, but he stuck with the big truck instead. As he drove down the hill, Jim ran down a group of 3 zombies who staggered down the road. The dump truck made quick work as it squashed the monsters into pulp. Seeing the street pizza in the truck's mirror caused Jim to laugh. It was messy but quick work, eliminating the roaming packs of zombies with his new toy. He'd clean up the mess later in the afternoon, after he did some work on upgrading the town's security. When Jim visited the Waresville Valley, Tennessee Public Works building the day before, he noticed a school bus depot next door. He parked the dump truck out front and let himself into the small office building. In reality, calling it a shack would be more accurate, but Jim knew he would find the bus keys inside. The same key, his large booted foot he used on the Public Works building, opened this door too. Convenient to have all the doors in town keyed alike. This thought made Big Jim laugh again. Inside the shack he found a small counter that ran along the front of the space, with one closed door beyond the office area. An empty bathroom sat behind the closed door. Behind the counter, Jim found a locked metal cabinet with a sign reading "Keys" on it, and a large whiteboard with bus numbers, an in or out magnet, and a driver name field. The numbers 1 to 25 identified each of the buses parked in the lot. It was a low-tech but efficient system to track the buses. A quick blow to the cabinet's door revealed 25 sets of keys. Big Jim grabbed a set from the enclosure and headed outside to find the bus they belonged to. Their tracking system may have used low-technology means, but they had been well organized. The key fob marked number 1 fit the bus parked in the spot labeled number 1, and it was the first bus in line. Nice. Last night, Jim had looked at the paper map and found 5 major roads that led into town. They were Main Street, Park Avenue, Oakwood Road, Chestnut Avenue, and Greenway Road. His plan was to use the school buses to form a blockade on each route before they reached the downtown area. These roadblocks would be movable, but would keep vehicle traffic out of the town. At least it would prevent people from entering the town easily. Jim would use the heavy equipment from the garage to dig trenches on the sides of each road to prevent anyone from driving around the buses. He'd have to work out a way to limit the incursion of the dead, but that would be a bigger project for a different day. Big Jim worked from the farthest road from the bus depot lot to the closest. His first stop would be Greenway Road. Greenway had 2 lanes in each direction, lined with commercial buildings on both sides of the road. He located a choke point where the trees encroached on the verge on both sides. Bus number 1 blocked the northbound lanes which led into the town. Jim would need 3 more buses to finish the makeshift blockade. Dark clouds continued to form throughout the morning, but they had little effect on the increasing heat and humidity. Jim was thankful he thought ahead to bring the electric bike along with him today. With the bike he made good time returning to the bus depot and depositing more school buses on Greenway Road. 4 buses made an effective wall blocking all 4 lanes, the median and the road shoulders to the tree line. The morning flew by, but Jim repeated his efforts on both Oakwood Road and Chestnut Avenue. This left only 2 remaining approach roads, and Jim hoped to finish blocking them both before the end of the day. He drove the dump truck to the grocery store to pick up something for lunch. Along the way, he crushed a half-dozen zombies under the tires of the heavy vehicle. Where were they coming from now? While enjoying his lunch back at the house, the skies opened up and the pouring rain started. Thunder and lightning accompanied the summer deluge. The heavy rain cleansed the streets of the leftover zombie guts, so Jim took the rest of the day off. He'd blockade the last 2 streets tomorrow after the rain stopped. No need to get soaking wet this afternoon, since he had seen no other threats to his safety. At the midpoint of the afternoon, Jim heard the roar of a diesel engine racing through the downtown area. It was a full-size pickup truck with 4 full-size doors on the cab and dual wheels on the back. While he watched their progress, they stopped in front of the town's only downtown hotel. The hotel stood 10 stories tall and had a famous brand name on the sign out front of the building. 5 men stepped from the truck, and Jim could tell they were trouble as soon as he saw them climb down onto the pavement. They spoke loud enough for him to hear their voices, but he couldn't decipher their words over the distance separating them. 3 zombies wandered the streets, and one of the crew pulled a pistol from his waistband and gunned them down. This crew had no concern about announcing their arrival to everyone within earshot. While Jim watched, the 5 men entered the lobby of the hotel. They took no precautions before entering the structure. This group was both brazen and foolish, showing a total lack of discipline and training. With the right equipment, they would be no match for Big Jim. Problem was, Jim hadn't been concerned with arming himself, so he had only the billhook saw and the Mossberg tactical shotgun. The billhook saw worked well for zombies and the shotgun was an effective short-range weapon, but neither would do when confronting a larger armed force. Shit. Within a few minutes of the thugs entering the hotel, the side door opened, and 3 compact figures ran out. Jim recognized the 3 teenagers from the grocery store encounter. He wanted to help them out once they met, and now he had his chance. All he needed was a plan using the resources he had on hand. If he only had the 3 other team members from his problem-solver days, this wouldn't be an issue. No sense wishing for resources from a past life he couldn't have anymore. He watched the 3 figures run down the block and around the corner onto the next street. They made a beeline for a large stone building with a sign out front which read, Waresville Valley Public Library. Good move. These morons won't be looking for books. These kids weren't as dumb as Jim had originally thought. They displayed a level of street smarts. The question now was what action to take. If it were Jim, he'd barricade himself on one of the upper floors of the hotel. It would make a sneak attack virtually impossible and provide an excellent field of view over the town. With 10 floors to search by himself and only a shotgun, a frontal attack would be foolish on his part. Best to stay put and gather intelligence. Big Jim would know the right opportunity to defeat these 5 losers when it came. He possessed the element of surprise, along with training and combat experience. When the time was right for him to attack, they wouldn't know what hit them. Besides, the teenagers had escaped to the town's library, so these clowns weren't a threat to anyone. At least not yet. He hoped the status of not being a hazard would remain. Maybe the group would just move on in the morning. Jim kept vigil behind the open doors in front of the master bedroom's balcony. After an hour, he could see lights on the 6th floor of the hotel. They may not have displayed any formal training, but they weren't total fools. A figure would cross in front of the windows at irregular intervals. From this distance, Jim didn't know if they were observing their surroundings or just wandering around inside the hotel's rooms. He wished for a sniper rifle or even a decent set of binoculars. Unfortunately, Big Jim had neither and no prospects of picking either item up. If Jim hadn't gotten sloppy, he would have visited the police station and equipped himself for the inevitable outside threat. Lesson learned, but it didn't help him with this current danger. He watched for 2 more hours and all the lights went out. No one left the hotel, so he guessed they went to sleep for the night. His home on the hill was secure, so he decided to get a few hours of sleep himself. Dawn's light would shine soon, and Big Jim knew an answer to this problem would come with the start of the new day. Better get some rest and eat a good meal so he could face the menace head-on afterward. Chapter 10. Day 7. It had only been a week since Big Jim vacationed with Melody in Washington, D.C. In that one short week, Melody turned into a flesh-eating monster and attacked another visitor at the National Zoo. A nuclear bomb destroyed the city, and everyone who had the misfortune of meeting Jim died along the way. Now he had a home in Wearesville Valley, Tennessee, and things had looked up until the 5 thugs came into town yesterday. Jim needed a plan with decisive action to neutralize this new threat and take back his town. The pickup truck remained in the same spot it occupied the previous evening, but all 4 tires were now flat. Jim chuckled to himself but recognized the danger at the same time. He was certain the 3 teenagers performed this vandalism since he knew of no other residents. Now these 5 armed men would be pissed off and looking for revenge. So much for them moving on today with no conflict as Jim originally hoped. Next time he would visit the police station first when he arrived in a new town to kit himself out with decent weapons. Big Jim pondered the proper actions while he ate his breakfast. He needed a plan which preserved his element of surprise and used the weapons he had available to him. There wasn't a straightforward solution. Jim finished his breakfast and went upstairs to get a status update from the balcony. 4 ATVs pulled up outside of a commercial warehouse building in the far corner of the town. They descended a rocky mountain trail before they parked in front of the massive structure. Great, now what? Jim watched as 3 men and 1 woman climbed off their off-road vehicles. 2 of the 3 men carried rifles while the woman and the 3rd man carried pistols. On second thought, the 3rd man looked to be a teenager. The town had been empty, but now it brimmed with life and everyone looked ready to fight. Movement out of the corner of his eye drew Jim's attention to 3 figures sneaking through the morning shadows. 3 teenagers carried their makeshift weapons and slinked toward the newcomers. He remembered their threats against him, and Jim hoped they weren't stupid enough to take on armed opponents. They were stupid enough to flatten the tires on the redneck's pickup truck, so he knew the answer. Shouts grabbed Jim's attention for a 3rd time. He looked toward the hotel and found the 5 men from the previous evening, discovering the damage done to their pickup truck. Their eyes turned toward the assembling crew at the corner of town. The newcomers weren't operating in stealth mode, and these punks were aware of their presence. All 5 losers drew their weapons and headed to the party. Shit. As Big Jim saw it, he had 3 options, and none were too attractive. He could wait and watch. The 3 groups would come together and battle, and Jim could wait for the victor to emerge. There would be fewer enemies to face, and it would assure his ultimate victory. Problem was, he wouldn't be able to look at himself in the mirror because they weren't all his enemies. They were just a scared bunch of people trying to survive the zombie apocalypse. Jim could load up the GTO or the F-150 and run away. It would be the safe move, at least for the short term, Big Jim didn't run from a fight though, so this option was out before he could even consider it. His third choice was to run straight into the fight, guns blazing. He didn't have the best equipment for this battle, but he knew it would be the only choice he could live with. Jim would target the 5 men from the pickup truck and hope for the best. They presented the largest threat in his mind. The teenagers didn't carry any guns, but the newcomers on the ATV did. Big Jim had no clue if the ATV riders were dangerous or not. A tank would be helpful for this fight, but he lacked one. Then the solution to his problem came to him. Jim had left the electric bike on charge, so it was ready to ride. No one would hear him coming because it made no noticeable noise. A silent electronic drivetrain, but his stealth approach wouldn't go unnoticed for long. He almost settled for the dump truck, but the loud diesel engine would have given him away once it started. This quiet option would provide him a little more time before he revealed himself to the army of 5. Any advantage in this fight would be worth taking. This plan of his would work better with a bulldozer, but he only had the backhoe. The public works building didn't contain a bulldozer, so that wasn't even an option. Jim had left the backhoe parked in an alley a few blocks away from where the battle formed, and no one had discovered it. A point for Big Jim. As he reached for the key to start the engine, the gunfire erupted. The backhoe's diesel engine roared to life as the gunfire intensified. Jim hoped the noise might mask his approach on the machine. He lifted the bucket to just below eye level and set off toward the exchange. A backhoe was good for about 20 miles per hour, so it felt like hours before Big Jim arrived at the scene of the armed fracas. At least 4 bodies laid on the ground when Jim finally arrived. The pickup truck posse took cover on the same side Jim approached from. One of the new corpses that littered the street belonged to a member of their group, and he hoped to add 4 more shortly. Big Jim knew the element of surprise disappeared when the bullets started bouncing off the bucket. Their small arms wouldn't be able to penetrate the heavy metal of the bucket, so Jim drove on. A bullet punctured the radiator of the backhoe, producing a stream of steam from in front of the hood. It only needed to stay running a few more minutes. A member of the pickup truck posse had taken cover behind a car, and they now had threats on both sides of them. Before he could decide where to go, Jim used the bucket to cut the man in 2. Another point for Big Jim. At least 3 more points needed for victory. Another man hid behind the car, parked in front of the vehicle Jim just crashed into. Big Jim downshifted and used the torque from the machine's screaming diesel engine to push the 2 cars together. The attacker's soft body produced no resistance and popped like a balloon. 2 more to go. Bullets continued to bounce harmlessly off of the backhoe's bucket. The 2 remaining attackers hid across the street, so Jim had to back away from the crashed cars. Steam continued to pour from the radiator. He cut the wheels hard to the left to redirect the attack. When the 2 remaining men saw the backhoe coming at them, they renewed their attack on the advancing machine. A bullet struck the left front tire, and even Big Jim couldn't pull the steering wheel back to center. While he tried, another bullet struck the right front tire, stopping the backhoe in its tracks. This was the reason he had wanted a bulldozer instead of the backhoe. You can't flatten metal tracks with bullets. Big Jim leapt off the far side of the backhoe and unloaded 3 shots at the closest combatant. He hadn't had time to aim, only provide cover fire for himself as he sought safety. Sometimes you get lucky, and this time Jim did, with a shot finding its mark and dropping the 4th gunman. As quickly as it started, the gunfire stopped, and an eerie silence fell over the town. Jim didn't know if they all ran out of ammo or if the last gunman saw the futility of his situation. He knew the Mossberg only held 3 more shells. There was a box of shells in the cab, but they might as well be back at the house. Jim shouted, trying to take control of the situation. "Throw your gun down and I'll let you go." "Let me go. You assholes flattened my tires. If you hadn't, we'd all be long gone by now. Now my buddies are all dead. You need to find better friends. This is my town now. You can stay and die or surrender your weapon and leave in peace." After a few moments, the last gunman responded. "Okay. I'm going to put my gun down and walk away." I hope you all rot in hell for what you did here. He placed the gun on the ground and stood up from his position under cover. Jim kept the Mossberg trained on the man. With a shake of his head, he turned away from the others and took a step away. 3 shots rang out, and the man staggered and then fell onto his face. What the hell, Corinne? He was giving up. Isaac, if you had the balls of our big savior, we wouldn't have lost Adam and Danny in this godforsaken town. Jim peered around the backhoe and saw the man and woman from the ATVs arguing with each other. 4 bodies laid on the ground surrounding them. The teenage girl Jim met previously at the supermarket sat in a heap, rocking on her haunches, hugging herself with her arms. Shit. Thank you, big man. I won't shoot you. You can come back to our camp with us. The woman's voice, Corinne, had an ear-piercing whine to it. There was something about her Jim didn't like already, but he had to check on the teenage girl. He retrieved the box of shells from the cab and kept the shotgun ready for action as he eased around the front of the backhoe. You're cute too. She had a wanton look on her face that made Jim's stomach churn. Corinne, really? Shut up, Isaac. I'm a woman, in case you didn't notice, and I have needs. Jim ignored the two and walked over to the teenage girl. Are you okay? She looked up at Jim and blinked quickly. He noticed the tears streaming from the corners of her eyes. It's okay. My name is Jim. You're safe now. Her eyes darted between the bodies of her 2 companions. She still didn't speak, but suddenly leapt to her feet and threw her arms around Big Jim. The hug touched Jim's emotions, but he could almost feel her grief. Then the annoying voice spoke again. Jimmy. Leave her behind and come with us. We have a place in the mountains. I'd love to get to know you better. I think we need to talk about this, Corinne. Shut up, Isaac. He just saved our lives. Your pansy ass can't say that. Stop it, both of you. Both of their heads snapped toward Jim at his harsh words. This wasn't getting them anywhere. Look, we're both going with you. If your place is any good, we'll stay. Otherwise, you two are on your own. You'd better not be lying to me. Sorry. Don't mind, Corinne. We'll take you back with us, but Max runs the camp. You or the girl staying will be up to him. Is that okay with you? Sure. Let's get going. Jim spoke to the girl. Can you ride an ATV? She shook her head. Okay, you can ride with me. Hold on tight. Without an invitation, Big Jim climbed onto the biggest of the 4 ATVs. The teenage girl climbed on behind him and held on with a death grip. That's my ATV. Not anymore. Jim spoke with a smile on his face, but he meant the look to be a threat. Isaac backed down and took one of the other 2 ATVs, since Corinne had claimed hers already. The path led them up the side of the mountain and over a pass to the other side. It was a narrow passage and would have been almost impossible to navigate with anything bigger than the ATVs. His passenger clung to him like her life depended on it. And it may have over some of the places they passed on this route. On the opposite side of the mountain, they came to a large clearing. Jim could see a small garage-type structure hidden within the tree line, but no other structures. He might have turned around and left the 2 behind, if he hadn't noticed the dark reflective material on the ground. Wherever they were staying, it had to be underground. They headed toward the garage, and Jim noticed the man as they parked. He was heavy-set and older. The type of man who didn't do physical work, at least not recently. He spoke as soon as they shut the engines off. Where are Adam and Danny? Who are these 2? We were attacked in the town. Adam and Danny didn't make it. If Isaac had balls, then the big guy wouldn't have had to save us. His name is Jim. The chick is deadweight. Her whiny voice hurt Jim's ears every time she spoke. Oh no. Both Adam and Danny are dead? Thank you, Jim, for stepping up and saving these 2. Can I get you some food? My name is Max, by the way. Hi, Max. I wouldn't pass up something to eat. However, the girl comes with me. Of course, I wouldn't dream of separating family. She had no relation to Jim, but he wouldn't correct Max if she didn't. They followed him to a doorway at the end of the garage. It looked like a blast door with no visible handle on the outside. Max punched a code into a hidden keypad, and the heavy door groaned as it swung open. A set of steps illuminated by dull light descended from the door into the mountain below. A client of mine built this facility. It's 5,000 square feet of living space underground, with another 7,500 of garage storage space above. You came in through the smaller garage annex. There is hydroponic farming equipment, but none of us have figured out how to use it. 10 of us are living here now. You've met Corinne and Isaac. My family and a few other friends round out the crew. What did you do before? I grew corn on a farm in Iowa. We didn't use hydroponic equipment, but I'm sure I could help you figure it out. I had been in Washington, D.C. when the zombies came to power, so I've had quite the run the last few days. Jim held back a description of his other talents. Wow, you covered a lot of ground. What's D.C. like? It's gone. They dropped a nuke on it. I'm guessing an attempt to stop the zombies. I wouldn't have expected that, but it doesn't surprise me. Well, let me get you something to eat. You and your friend can stay in Suite G. Each suite has 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a common seating area. Let me see about getting you both some clean clothes to wear. Then you can take a shower and get some rest. We're safe here. They had walked down 2 flights of stairs and through 100 yards of hallway before coming to the large open common area. The common area had a kitchen, a dining, and an entertainment area. All first class. It must have cost a fortune to build this place all underground, into the side of a mountain. Max walked off to talk with a woman in the kitchen area. Jim took the opportunity to look around the common room, while the girl sat down at the table and rested her head in her hands. Max returned carrying 2 plates heaped with food. A cheeseburger sat in the center while a fresh salad and baked beans rounded out the platter. Please sit and eat. I'm sure you're both hungry and dehydrated because of your ordeal out there. I'll bring you both some water and iced tea. Have as much as you like. Thanks, Max. Big Jim saw no reason to correct Max's mistaken conclusion. If he wanted to see weakness, then that was okay with Jim. It would allow him to not appear as a threat while he determined their motives. Besides, Jim didn't know how the teenager had fared on the outside. After they finished their meal, Max returned to speak with them. Let me show you your suite. They aren't huge, but they're comfortable. Suite G sat at the back right corner of the common area, across from the kitchen. The main seating area featured a love seat, a recliner, a small desk with a chair, and a flat-screen television. It felt like an upscale hotel room. Both bedrooms were the same. King-sized beds, a dresser, a smaller flat-screen television, and a door opening into a full bathroom. I hope you'll find these accommodations comfortable. There's a storage room with clothing, and I've sent my wife to find you both something to wear. We have washing machines so we can clean your current clothes after your showers. Thank you. Y'all have been very kind to us. Great. Get some rest and we'll see you at dinner time. Max left the room. The girl had done nothing but follow Jim and stare around the room. She still hadn't talked. If it's okay with you, I'll take this room, and you can have the other. Don't wander around by yourself though. I don't trust them yet, and neither should you. She jumped when Jim addressed her, but she made eye contact and nodded her agreement. That's a step in the right direction at least. Dinner came and Jim joined them in the common room. The meal featured tasty food, and everyone ate their fill. These people weren't lacking for anything. He hoped they weren't consuming their stores too quickly. After the meal, Jim pumped them for more information. He needed to know if the girl and him were okay staying with this group. Jim wanted to find a group to help, but didn't want to make a mistake trusting the wrong people. What brought your group into town? Max spoke. We have 3 solar arrays, and the controller on one of them is acting up. I thought the electronics store in town might have one, so I sent Isaac and the crew in to retrieve it. You saw the battle that broke out. We didn't even get to look for the controller. Isaac continued the story. If you tell me what it looks like, I can go get it tomorrow. There are a few things I'd like to grab back in town too. Jim wondered if he could get the GTO back to the camp. That would be wonderful. Isaac can go with you and point out the part. He didn't want Isaac going with him, but Jim saw no logical reason to exclude him. Isaac didn't prove himself capable during today's battle, and Jim didn't want to travel with a weak link. Jim would have to worry about Isaac's safety now, since returning without him would cast doubts on his intentions. Okay, sounds good. I'm going to retire and get some rest. We should leave early in the morning. Okay, Isaac. Jim noticed the quick glance Isaac gave to Max before responding. Sure. When they returned to the suite, Jim spoke to the girl. If there's anything you want me to grab while I'm in town, let me know. While I'm gone, stay in the room. I think we can trust them, but I'm not sure yet. Okay. She stood and stared at Jim for what felt like minutes, but only had been seconds. He thought she might speak for the first time since she swallowed several times. But in the end, she nodded her agreement before she turned and walked into her bedroom. Well, he tried to reach her. Guess she'll respond when she's ready to talk. Chapter 11. Day 237. Over the last 8 months, Big Jim had become the de facto leader of the group. Max still held the official position, but he ran all decisions past Jim before he took any action. A mob lawyer gave him a certain amount of power in the civilized world, but those skills held no weight during the zombie apocalypse. After being locked underground for the winter, Max appeared to be losing his mind. He forgot things often and repeated himself when he spoke. Max didn't get around as well as he had only a few months earlier. Jim worried about him, but keeping everyone alive was his #1 priority, rather than worrying about Max's mind and health. A short time after Jim arrived in the camp, Max discovered his protégé's son had survived, and he spoke with him on the shortwave radio. Donald made it safely to a camp in Maine, and he had a small group of survivors with him. Jim rejoiced at Max's happiness, but Big Jim felt something was off with this Donald guy after speaking with him. He couldn't put his finger on what the issue was, but something about Donald just seemed odd to Jim. The radio had been invaluable because it delivered news from the outside world. With the destruction of D.C., the former head of HUD, Carl Stevens declared himself President of the new United States, NUS. President Stevens had settled the country's seat of power around the CDC, and declared a cure to the zombie plague forthcoming. Atlanta had suffered damage from a major hurricane and zombies had completely overrun it, so the new CDC occupied a secret location in Georgia west of Atlanta. Jim felt the biggest threat to their security centered on this new tyrant and the troops he assembled close to their camp. Carl wanted all survivors to bow to him and his regime, and would use force to make it happen if you didn't do so freely. Trips into town had been less frequent these days, but so far there had been no sign of the NUS Army. April had helped Big Jim get the hydroponic systems working, and it had been one reason they hadn't traveled into town. After their first week in the camp, that skinny, scared teen started talking and hadn't stopped since. Jim loved her like a daughter, and found out she was intelligent and good with tools. She took to the farming like she had been doing it all her life, and had become Jim's right hand. At 17 years old, April displayed a higher level of maturity than the other adult members of this group. The main water pump had failed on their hydroponic farm, and Jim hoped to replace it or find parts to repair it in the electronics warehouse in Waresville Valley. They currently ran on the backup pump and had a spare, but both pumps had a smaller capacity than the main pump. Their aeroponics system required a water pump to constantly mist the roots of the plants as they passed by the jets. No mist on their roots meant the crops would die within minutes, so they depended on a functional pump. A failed water pump would mean the end of their food supply. Jim knew he needed to speak with Isaac because he required him to provide backup on this excursion. With Corinne 7 months pregnant, Jim didn't look forward to the conversation. She had been a bitch before she got knocked up, and the hormones made her a nightmare to deal with. Big Jim had been happy he never gave in to Corinne's advances when he arrived at the camp. There might be time for love again someday, but not with a woman like her. Isaac, I need you to go with me into town today. We need to get a new water pump for the hydroponic farm. Take someone else, Jim. I could go into labor at any moment, and he needs to be here for me. Corinne, you're only 7 months pregnant, so it's highly unlikely. Besides, what help will Isaac be with your delivery? Stop giving my man such a hard time. Both of you stop it. I'll be ready to go in 10 minutes. Every once in a while, Isaac put his pants on and spoke up. As Jim turned away to gather his gear, he heard the two of them continue to bicker. If there was any justice in the world, Corinne would have become a zombie, and Melody would still be alive here with Jim. Unfortunately, things didn't work out the way Jim wanted them to, and he had lost Melody forever. April walked into the room as Big Jim checked his equipment one last time. He always double and triple checked everything before a mission. This thoroughness kept him alive during his time in the Problem Solvers, and it would preserve him during the apocalypse. Hey kid, keep an eye on the plants and that pump while I'm gone. Do you need something from town? How about a Hershey bar? You know we are going to an electrical supply house. I don't think they have candy. April displayed her infectious killer smile. That sucks. Well, watch your ass out there. I need you to return to me safely. You got it, sweetie. Those zombies won't get the best of Big Jim. You're getting older and slower, you know. Big Jim laughed at her insult. I can still kick your ass, youngster. I've got to get moving. Watch yourself, April. Jim had been teaching April survival skills, and she caught on fast. She could shoot better than anyone else at camp besides Jim, and she understood the basics of hand-to-hand combat. Her physical limitations were only being 5'7" tall and weighing about 100 pounds soaking wet. April fought like a feral cat, and Jim hoped it would be enough when the time came for her to fight for her life. Isaac was already in the garage when Jim entered. He had 2 ATVs ready to go. The quickest way to town had them follow a narrow trail which wandered up and over the mountain. They could travel this path with an ATV, but no other vehicles could make the trip over the rugged terrain. Jim had hoped to bring the GTO back to the camp, but it hadn't been a practical decision. He hoped the car would remain hidden in the house's garage on the hill, and he could reclaim it someday. Why do you always bring a bow and arrow, Jim? Take an AR-15 like me. Zombies respond to noise and my bow is silent. Your rifle will draw every zombie within 10 miles if you start shooting. Who will be smart then? Without waiting for a reply, Jim started the ATV and headed toward the path to town. He knew Isaac would follow him because he may not be the smartest tool in the shed, but he was loyal. Isaac owed his life to Big Jim, and he never forgot that even without being reminded. Jim bailed him out during their first encounter and several more times since then. After crossing over to the opposite side of the mountain, there was a turnoff where Jim always stopped to look over the town. It stood higher than the balcony on his previous home and at a different angle, but it provided a view of the entire town. At one point, Jim returned to the town and finished barricading the road with the remaining school buses, so any unknown visitors to town were rare. Today the town appeared to be empty, so Jim urged his ATV onward. They reached the warehouse and dismounted the ATVs. A few zombies roamed the far end of the street and appeared unaware of their presence. Isaac raised his gun and Jim spoke one word. No. Isaac dropped his aim and turned toward Jim with a hurt look on his face. They don't even know we're here. No need to let them and their friends know. Only take them out when you have to. Jim entered the building with Isaac on his heels. A large warehouse with tall metal shelves filled a football field-sized space. The pumps should be down this aisle. Keep your eyes open for trouble. Isaac nodded and followed Jim with his rifle pointed toward the ground. Big Jim appreciated the second set of eyes, but wished they belonged to a more capable operator. Their search lasted for about 10 minutes before they found what they were looking for. Luck had been on their side because there were 3 pumps on the shelf. Jim grabbed 2, and Isaac struggled to carry the third. Looks like they would make it back to the camp in time for lunch. As they exited the building, Jim saw the men before they spoke. On the authority of the new United States, I order you to halt and surrender. 10 men stood in a semicircle between the exit of the building and the 2 ATVs. They wore the same black uniforms, but all carried different weapons. None displayed the training or discipline of military personnel. What ya taking from that store, gentlemen? Where ya heading to? Jim knew no good could come from cooperating with these morons, and he hoped Isaac would be smart enough to keep his big mouth shut. The water pumps. So much for Isaac being smart. He had to take control of this encounter before things got out of hand. Isaac would give everyone at the camp up without even thinking, because he didn't think. Just consider his ill-advised relationship with Corinne as a case in point. Good for you, boys. Now put her weapons down and her hands up. I'm afraid that ain't happening. Jim needed to remove the focus from Isaac before he ended up getting them both killed. The Big O speaks. There's 10 of us and we're all armed. Some dorky Robin Hood dude isn't a match for us. That's the first smart thing you've said so far. Jim smiled at his own private joke. The pumps they carried weighed about 50 pounds each, but Jim threw the one in his right hand at the man who had been talking. His face contorted with a terrible crunching noise as he collapsed. Jim's quick violent act caused the other 9 men to pause, and a second was all Big Jim needed. He swung the other pump in an arc, smashing the heads of those standing to his left. A quick snap kick took out another while he brought his right arm around in a big arc, striking other NUS soldiers. Within 10 seconds, 9 bodies laid on the ground, and one man held his hands up in front of his face. Please don't. I didn't want to come with these men, but they have my family. Take me with you, please. What about your family? They killed my wife and daughter in front of me when we tried to run away. I'd be next if I ran again. I had no choice. What's your name? Sean Hill. Here's what you're going to do, Sean. You go back with these clowns and find out what they're planning. Feed their plans back to us. We've got a network of camps throughout the East Coast, and your intelligence can help us fight the NUS. What do you think? Okay. When do I return? In 3 months, bring their plans back to this warehouse. Got it? Yes, sir. Great. Oh, and sorry. Sorry? Jim clubbed him with a giant right fist, rendering him unconscious. Why'd you do that? He said he was going to help us. What do you think they would have done to him if he was unmarked when they all came to? They would suspect his treachery, and we'd lose our spy. Now help me grab their stuff. We have to disgrace this group. Isaac picked up their ammo and all the supplies they carried, while Jim disabled their weapons. This would be hard to explain to their superiors. 10 men jumped by 2, well really 1, since Isaac did nothing to help Jim during the brief fight. Their story would probably morph to facing off against 20 men. Jim chuckled while they worked. He left them tied in pairs in front of the building, and they rode back up the hill. When they returned to the camp, Jim headed for garage number 5, knowing Isaac would follow him there. It was the most remote building on the grounds of the camp's living facilities, and they seldom visited it. Jim dismounted his ATV and waited for Isaac to do the same. Jim. What are we doing here? Shouldn't we park in the garage closer to camp? What happened today has to stay between us. You can't even tell Corinne. Understand? Why? Doesn't everyone need to know? No. Max is losing his mind, and you know it. Knowing the threat of the NUS would push him over the edge. I need to figure out how to neutralize their threat, and telling the others would do no good. With any luck, our remote location will keep us safe, but we can't count on that. You're a farmer. What do you know? I've spent half my life on a farm, however, I spent the other half working for a secret organization in the government. I was part of one of those alphabet agencies that polite people don't want to know about, but are grateful for when the shit hits the fan. I know the evils on both sides and can recognize a despot like Carl Stevens. He won't be happy until he controls everything and everyone. Well then, everyone should know. I can take care of myself, you know. I've seen you in a fight, and I'm sorry to say you're useless. No one in our camp can stop them except for me. Telling the others would only cause anxiety, and it might cause them to do something stupid. These guys won't be happy with what happened today, and they will be back. Let's gather the intelligence from our new spy, and let me come up with a plan. Think about the safety of your unborn child. Isaac turned away and stood staring off across the garage at nothing. Jim hoped he would see the wisdom of his argument. No one in this camp besides Jim could solve this problem, and this would be a major problem. After a minute or two of staring, Isaac jumped back on his ATV and drove across the camp to the main garage. Big Jim hoped Isaac would keep his mouth shut, but he doubted Isaac would be able to. He feared Corinne would know before nightfall, and this outside threat would destroy the camp from the inside out. April's training would be stepped up, and Jim hoped they would both survive, even if the others didn't.